workshop meeting to order. And what I'll do is I'll turn it over to the superintendent, and she can begin with her presentation.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman Stallings. Before we begin the workshop and the presentation, I would like to ask for a moment of silence in remembrance of September 11. Our thoughts are with all of those whose loved ones were lost 17 years ago today, and we want to honor them and all of the first responders, the soldiers, the everyday heroes who are willing to sacrifice themselves to protect others from harm. And so we thank everyone, and I ask that you join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. So this, an effort to kind of guide and structure our evening. I know that I tried to kind of give us some minute allotments, but I know that we're off a little bit, and I'm going to talk to the structure of the presentation. We're going to begin by unpacking first two of our priority areas, teaching and learning and school culture and climate. And the way we've structured the presentation is to look into the major goals around teaching and learning, literacy, graduation, review the data, and then go into an opportunity to have some Q&A, followed by another one of our major one of our priority areas, which is school culture and climate, and digging deep into our absenteeism and our goal around making sure that our students feel safe and valued, also followed by some Q&A. And I have the team here with me. As you know, we have finished our planning, our departmental planning that connects to the strategic operating plan, and everything that, in terms of our improvement efforts, everything is connected to our strategic operating plan. And so what the data that are going to be discussed here today, everyone owns, if you will, the outcomes and the strategies and the actions related to the goals that we want to achieve. And so everyone is here with respect to their department and the oversight connected to each of the goals. So they will jump into the presentation in and out throughout the night. Always kind of grounding us as to who it is that we serve. I'm not going to go into the details, but know that I have added some information here around staffing, just so that we can kind of contextualize those that we're committed to, in addition to our students, and the fact that a lot of the work that we're presenting here today is around our staff and changing and meeting their needs as adult learners and adult practitioners. So just to highlight where we are going to be today in terms of our goals, we're going to look at around teaching and learning, literacy, graduation, and then chronic absenteeism and our students feeling safe and valued. I'm highlighting here our statement around teaching and learning, and that's to make sure that our instruction is rigorous and that also tends to the social and emotional supports that our students need. And we've talked about major goals, and we know that a major goal are those that we believe are the highest leverage goals and areas for us to improve. So the first data slide that we see here is around our third grade literacy. We've seen part of this slide we have seen before. And so I'll begin by looking at where we are today. Some of you, actually, I think I sent this information to all of you in terms of where we are. The scores were, I believe last week, were finally confirmed and released by the State Department of Education. And so we see here to the left, this is our trend around Smarter Balance. And where we were last year, we were at 18.3% of our students that were at or above proficiency, grade level proficiency. And so we did see an increase to 22.1%, slightly lower by 0.6 of our target. Nonetheless, we see that there was an improvement there. Want to point out the fact that we always are mindful of the achievement gap that exists among our subgroups. And so as you can see, our students with disabilities or English learners, there's a significant gap there. And then when we look at our Hartford residents versus our non-Hartford residents, our students in our magnets that are not Hartford residents, still we have a significant gap there. I'm going to kind of speak to, I'm going to ask Dr. Negron to unpack for us the why. The way that we structured the presentation is how does the data look, and then going into what contributed to the gains or what contributed to the decline, if there was a decline in any of the data points, and what it is that we're going to do forward, what we're currently doing now, given that the year has already started. So Dr. Negron will unpack for us why it is that we can celebrate the fact that we had a 3.8% gain in our literacy.
Okay, thank you. So we're very excited about the gain, realizing that there's still much work that needs to be done. But I think it's important that we're able to tease out exactly how it is that we're making improvements so that we can work to accelerate the rate in which we are achieving those gains. So I want to highlight that we believe that what led to that gain is the fact that there is now a very clear structure that has been put in place. The district has been working aggressively in making sure that there is a student-centered and balanced literacy curriculum that is grounded in the Connecticut core standards. And right now, that balanced literacy curriculum entails the following components: making sure that we're focusing on foundational skills, reading skills for children, read aloud, share reading and writing, guided reading, and independent reading. In addition to that, also making sure that there are literacy supports that are being put in place to make sure that there's a strong collaboration between the way central office is going about supporting the individual schools, so that we're able to problem solve and that we're able to share best practices. In addition to that, it's also a focus around building and or increasing the adult capacity, again, to be able to make sure that everybody's equipped to really teach the foundations of reading. There's a lot of work that has been done to make sure that we are able to do so. As you know, in kindergarten to grade 2, the district had been employing the Foundations program. That focuses again around phonemic awareness, and again, making sure that all our teachers are equipped to teach foundations. In addition, leveraging opportunities that are available through the Connecticut State Department of Education, such as our participation in the K-3 reading skills professional learning, known as ReadCon. We do believe that those things, in addition to the literacy support model that entails our ELE coaches, has led to those gains. What we're looking to do this year is to continue to work aggressively in those pieces, highlighting, again, the foundational skills by expanding from K2 to pre-K3. Now all the schools will be able to deliver foundations, and also honing in on the guided reading component of that balanced literacy. We have made very clear expectations to all schools on what it looks like and the different features that should be present in every school. I have highlighted those for you in that slide. So we're working around what are the conditions that need to be present in the classroom in terms of the organization of that classroom, what are the components that need to be present in regards to instruction, assessment, and what should be what happens inside of those stations and those centers. There's aggressive professional learning that is being delivered not only to the classroom teachers, but also to the school administrators to make sure that they fully understand what it is that they should be looking for when they're visiting classrooms in order to be able to give quality feedback to classroom teachers.
Dr. Negron, can I just ask you for a minute here around the guided reading? So we know that these are, the components of the entire model. And, we know that we're saying that this already, the foundational skills and the programming around that already exists in all of our schools, and we're going to expand it. And so can you speak briefly as to where we are in terms of the other ones, right? So read aloud, share reading and writing, and independent reading. And then, if you mind, just a brief overview of what guided reading is, given that we're putting a lot of eggs in that basket this year around guided reading in all of our schools and with our professional learning.
So we had, the district had launched a guided reading across the board, had launched it as a district initiative, but it wasn't until this year that we are saying that we are expecting everyone to follow the curriculum that has been laid out by the district. So that's a very clear expectation. Everyone is expected to follow the curriculum, that it will be monitored, that we'll be focusing on the professional learning. And then we are lifting, again, to make sure that in every school, we can see guided reading happening. And what that means, again, is that when we're walking into those classrooms, there should be a dedicated 60 minutes, and within those 60 minutes, that there are those 30 minutes that are allocated to the guided reading, meaning that during that time, because a teacher has administered a benchmark assessment, like the FMP that we're using now, and everybody will be administering, that knowledge that we're gaining for that assessment will allow teachers to then think about what are going to be, what is the instructional level of the students in the classroom, and not only that, what are the independent reading levels of children, so that it would allow the teacher to set those small groups within the classroom. So what we should see would be that there are these stations and these centers that are happening, and that children are rotating, but you will always see then a classroom teacher working directly with a small group of small group of students, and that it is intentional, meaning that there's conferencing that is going on. There is, for example, administration of running records to determine where a child is at. There are comprehension conversations that the teacher is engaging with each individual child during that center, and making anecdotal notes to make sure that there is a record keeping of knowing where is this child at, what do I need to now do in my next lesson to continue to inform the work that is being done with children. At the same time, that there's careful attention to what is the task or the activities that are being asked of children as they travel into those stations and those centers. So it can't be like go off and go color at a station, that it has to be meaningful in terms of extending that learning, and that there has to be a way to bring in accountability. So even when children are working independently, that we know what's happening in those centers. And I want to also note that the work has begun. We do realize, and we develop a continuum so that schools can create a needs assessment to let us know. Because we know it's not something new. There are some people that are at various levels in being able to do guided reading, but taking a needs assessment so that schools can do that and tell us, this is where we believe we are, Then we'll do walks to make sure that we can align that needs assessment with what we see. And then from there, we're gonna be differentiating then what does that support look like in terms of that particular school, right? When we take a school, for example, like, Betances. So when we take a school like Betances Early Reading Lab, and I apologize, I'm still learning all the names of the schools, we know that that's a school that has been working with guided reading in the past. We should not be walking in and saying, because we're doing this as a district level, you're all gonna start here. That would be inappropriate of us to do that. Just like we ask classroom teachers to differentiate the learning for the students, we have to do the same thing when it comes to equipping our adults to be able to employ these strategies. So that is the attack that we're utilizing in supporting the schools, in helping them to move along the continuum in these 4 areas within guided reading. Again, the classroom environment, the instruction, the assessment, and the stations and the centers. We believe that this, along with our strategy around data teams, will bring it together to make sure that we're constantly gathering data, monitoring the information that we have collected in terms of how students are doing, so that we can continue to intervene and tweak what we're doing within our guided reading implementation. So this way we don't have to wait till the end of the year to say, sorry, we made a mistake, it didn't work, so that we can continue to tweak it along the way.
Hello. So my question, immediately I started thinking about our students that, for instance, some of our students are pulled out of class, especially our English language learners, right? And in the past, what I noticed, and maybe it's not even going on now, and you can tell me so. So you're pulling the child out for extra support while something else is going on, and they don't know what we did when you were gone. And then you come back with like the work that you did, which was good work, but you don't know what we just covered in class. So I always wondered about that part, because you'll be talking about it later on in the day, and the students that were pulled out, they don't know what you're talking about. So it was like a disconnect. So I always wonder about when the students are pulled out for extra support, if it's not connected to exactly what we're learning, yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because now that I have full oversight over all the various departments and working closely with Dr. Sellers, what we've done is that the vision that we have laid out is that we have to make sure that all children have to have access to the grade level standards, meaning the curriculum that we have laid out. It makes absolutely no sense, like you're saying, to be pulling them out to receive an intervention when we are not even giving them access to what we're doing in Tier 1. So what we are working right now collaboratively, again, between the Department of English learners, with Dr. Sellers, in making sure that we are, again, building the capacity of our special education teachers, or EL teachers, or bilingual teachers, in making sure that they truly understand what it is that we're doing, so that a lot of those interventions, number one, should either be aligned with what's happening at the Tier 1 level, and also increasing the Tier 2 interventions that are provided even within that same block. Not always do we need to be pulling out children to deliver a Tier 2 intervention. And I think that's where we're taking an opportunity to kind of rethink the way that we're approaching things, and make sure that we laid out very clear vision of what it is that we're saying, what should happen in terms of making sure that all children have access to the curriculum. Because right now, again, in my own needs assessment coming new into the district and trying to determine how is it that things are done, the reality is that often we're not giving kids access, because we are pulling them out. They're not even exposed to the Tier 1. So again, we're just starting the work, but we're going to be very aggressive about it.
Any other questions? Mr. Flores?
And I have particular concern over the achievement gap between the different kinds of students, now from different communities and so forth. And I wonder if you could talk about how you address that.
So I'm gonna start, and then I'll let Ms. Avila add to that as well. Something besides that expectation around access to Tier 1 for all students, the other piece that I am employing within my office is the need to make sure that we are constantly also disaggregating the data that we're collecting from students. We have to make sure and not just wait for smarter balanced data or SAT data to disaggregate, but to make sure that we're disaggregating all the time, because I want to know, how is this working out for ELs? How is it working out for students identified with special needs? And that we have to know that, so that I can push the people in my department that as we are crafting either curriculum, or we're crafting assessments, or we're crafting whatever it is that we're crafting, that we should start with those needs in mind first and not backtracking. I think often what happens is things are built for like the regular student, and then on the back end you try to then squeeze in, how are you going to now support ELs and support students with special needs? Instead of in development phase, why not start there first instead of working backwards? So that's something that I'm also bringing to the office. I will let Eva add a little piece around scheduling.
So in preparation of implementing the major actions, the principals worked on creating the conditions. That's what they do, to create the conditions and the structures to support the ability to keep children in the classroom and have everyone experience Tier 1 instruction. So looking at the schedule that everyone is in the classroom during that time, during guided reading, and that's uninterrupted sacred time, and creating an intervention block so that that's not during Tier 1, differentiating their schedule to know this is Tier 1 and this is intervention, so that you don't get all of the constant pulling for the additional services that children might need. So that during the time that some children might be pulled, then Tier 2 is happening in the classroom with some other children that might need it, and then everyone is receiving the actual services they need, as opposed to not experiencing Tier 1 instruction. So that was done in preparation at the end of last school year to prepare for this coming school year, so that would alleviate the pulling of children out of classroom and not experiencing Tier 1.
Julio, one piece that we are now thinking through is what else can we do outside of the classroom and the school doors, right? So we know that all of these things that have been spoken about are related to adult practice, leadership practice, structures, processes, and so we have to think about what else can we leverage with our families, right, with our community, around bridging the gap as well.
In addition, we also have a process. We will be launching a process called school progress reviews, which allows the leader of the school instructional team to come together with district as well, district cabinet members as well, to sit together to actually analyze deeply all of the data around our major actions, so that we can closely monitor what is happening, what needs to happen, and to provide additional support as needed. And so that will also get back to your question about how do we make sure that all of our students are succeeding.
Thank you. We had two board members join us. We're on what page?
Slide 8.
Slide 8. And we're just asking questions about the literacy portion of the superintendent's major goals. And so with that, I'll just ask a question while they find their way in the slideshow. So my question is kind of loaded, so I'll try to strip it down. One, I guess the first question is how much is the student being assessed? Because in order for you to intentionally keep track of the data, we're talking about not just the standardized SBAC, but we're talking about individual assessments in the class and then a sort of quarterly benchmark for the school. So how much of that is prep time versus how much of that is just the joys of just, hey, read just to read, no pressure, and develop a love of reading. The second question would be, how does a parent and family members fall into this? Because this sounds like very technical approach and a very an intentional approach from an instructional level. But if I don't know what a DRA is, then how do I support the young reader at home? How do I know what the standards are so that I can pick appropriate books, whether it's a book or a magazine? But how do I reinforce that? And how do we reinforce that as a community? And I guess that's a lot. I'll leave it there and then I'll pause with that one.
Dr. Negron, can you speak to not only the frequency, but also the assessment type as well?
So in terms of the assessment that I referenced before that we're going to be using to monitor for the guided reading, the FMP, Fontes and Penal, that will be administered 3 times a year. Right now, schools are in the process of administering that, the first one, so that we can have that baseline. And then what will happen when I was mentioning those, the running records, the anecdotal notes, as students are in class, and then when they're getting ready to travel within those stations, that's when it happens that a teacher then can pull an individual student and be able to do that quick assessment. So it isn't like it stops and then everybody's testing. That's not the way that it would be administered. So we are extremely cognizant. One of the things that we also did is to take a look at the entire district assessment calendar and really think about what is it that we have. And I think that was the beauty of being new to the district, that I could ask a wealth of information. Like, why are we doing this? For what? How are we using it? How does it inform instruction? And it allows to make decisions about if there's redundancy in testing, then why are we doing that? Why not just get rid of it? Or if we're administering an assessment just for the sake of saying, hey, we administer it, but then it's not being utilized at the classroom level, then what's the point? And I think we need to get rid of that as well. So we're being very cognizant that we're screening everything and make sure, again, that if we are going with a particular assessment, also equip the schools to be able to do it. Know how to administer, know how to collect the data, make sure that we have a plan on when we're going to pull the data, when are we going to analyze it, when do we bring it back. And I think the beauty of the SPR, the school progress reviews, as well as the data team, is that there's going to be the strong collaboration between my office and the Office of Schools, whereas what we're finding, we're able to connect and then make plans as to how does that information going to get back into the school level and the classroom level, so that it's constantly being used. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Yes, it did. Now the flip side of the question is, again, this is all contingent on the student. How do we develop a love of reading is our primary goal. And I guess one, and two, it goes to what the students are reading. So is that a matter of what are the options in terms of what they're reading, the content? Is it culturally relevant? But moreover, how long do you suspect it would take for you to have strong data on this approach? Because if I'm afraid to ask you what we've been doing before this and this was implemented, but we've only done this maybe 6 months, you're saying, or something like that, or towards the end of the school year?
For When you're saying this,
You said something about we were doing something towards the end of the school year, or we just started to implement.
The structures.
the structures.
Right, so then we won't even understand, there's gonna be some time before you concretely have those structures in place, so we're looking at what?
The structures are mostly in place because we started at the end of last year, but in terms of the shared understanding
The culture of it.
and the practice
Yeah.
of what does it look like, sound like, feel like, what is it that you're gonna see when you go,
Right.
you know, in a walkthrough,
Right.
the 60-minute
Yeah.
block and the stations, that's new for some schools this year.
But not new for plenty of it.
Right.
I've seen these done years ago.
Yeah.
So it's not like they weren't doing anything. Like, no.
Right.
Thank you.
But structured
You might-
in a way.
There wasn't a universal
Thank you.
approach
Structured
to
in
the
a
work.
way amongst every, so he's saying like they wasn't just doing anything. All of these things look familiar, but having it structured and being able to recognize it when you go in and making it meaningful and uniform
Right.
is the thing. But correct.
And other, you know, some schools had one element of the model
Right.
that is the one that was their go-to element and the one that they, you know, implemented for 45 minutes out of the 60 minutes when, you know, it's, right? So the fidelity of the implementation was not consistent throughout the district. And so now there's, in addition to our efforts to build the capacity around what does it look like for the student and for the adult, now it's the other element around the monitoring, right? And then you add the other data structure to that. And, you know, then we have an accountability piece to it as well.
Any other questions?
So just to address your,
Once,
oh, I'm so sorry, I was answering part
Okay,
of your
okay.
question.
Oh, the
But you can
family
go, yes,
question.
but you can go ahead if,
no.
okay. So just to answer the second part of your question in regards to how will this relate to our families? So when working with Dr. Negron and our chief of schools and looking at the independent reading levels and working through our FRAs and also our CBOs, finding a way to share that in layman's terms so parents can know how they can model that for their students. So an example would be, we've already had a discussion about a small symposium with our parents and also working with Hartford Parent University in one of their sessions to really get down to what is guiding reading. Answering that question first before we try to break out tools and rubrics and all of that with them, but helping them to really grasp what is guided reading. And then using those independent reading levels that are established through the assessments, we'll be able to have another conversation to say, these are types of books. If your student is on this particular reading level, here's a type of book that you can take out from the library or even take out from the school library to help and assist your child. So that's just like one way that we're trying to get down to the layman's terms around what does it look like, is through the modeling and then working cross-departmentally.
So, if I'm not involved at HPU, then I don't get this training, or how is it systematically implemented? And how, like, for example, again, if I'm not a member of an organization, how am I getting this information?
So what I just offered that as an example to say that HPU is collaborating with us to offer one
Right.
avenue, but you can get that through classes at your school, through the Family Resource Center. We, as HPS, we are doing a piece for all of our parents that they'll be invited to. So it's not just like a one-time piece, but this will be continuously offering ways to understand what guided reading is and how you can use that with your child.
All right, so we don't have a methodical, systematic approach yet.
And when you say a systematic approach, I just want to be clear. So we have times and dates that we are looking to do this with our families that I can share with the entire board. Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you. Mrs. Flores.
And this is not really a question, it's more a comment that some of you have heard, but all of us here. When we look at our plan, we have a 5-year plan. When we look at 2022, we're actually looking at children in 3rd grade who have been with us throughout if we're saying that children have been with us throughout this process, and where our target is for 40% of them to be proficient, that sort of means that our target is to fail.
If we unpack, the target is for the entire aggregate. And so if we look at students by grade, we can see what their growth and their proficiency is. And so perhaps we can follow up with the additional data to see how our students are doing as a cohort. What you're referring to is the students that are in cohort. And so in this data, we have students that come to us in fourth grade and leave and then come back. And so perhaps it's important for us to look also at the cohort data and the matched students. Abby, we have the ability to look at that. And then the other piece to your question around the targets, we are looking at the targets and in alignment with what the State Department of Education has also for us as targets. And I know that a 2%, for example, rate of growth in proficiency seems extremely low. But it is comparable, and I am not lowering the standard. That's not what I'm doing. But when we're talking about the standards and really unpacking it, it's not only the student that needs support, but it also is the adult that needs the support. And so I hear you, Julio. I've heard you, Karen. I've heard everybody on the board. But it's. I wish we can say tomorrow our targets are going to be 10%. Right? We can say that. We want all of our students to meet, right? To all 100 of our students to be proficient and or above proficiency. But those are not, it's not realistic of a target. And so, we can continue to unpack the data and identify if, a higher percentage, but we're looking and we're making the targets. I hear you.
I'm trying to understand what I'm looking at here. We're talking about third grade proficiency. So are these targets for third grade, or are they for the entire district?
Our third graders, correct. And so we have to look at two things, right? So as a district, we know that our students from all the way up to 8th grade test, right? And so when we look at it, we know that only 22% of our students are meeting the target. The question then, we have all of the data, Julio, for all of our students and all of our grades. Moving forward by now, I think this is the first year that we can say, so we have standards aligned curriculum in all of our schools. We now have the assessments that go along with those. So moving forward, we can be able to say the expectation is for our students to reach proficiency. But we already have students right now in 2nd grade, for example, that are not reading at grade level.
Who hopefully will not be in 3rd grade by 2022.
No, right, but we have to, there are two tracks, if you will, right? The students that are already on grade level, those should be able to maintain and sustain. The students that are lower in 1st grade or in 2nd grade, those are the ones that we're talking about, the interventions that we have to deliver for them. So we can continue to disaggregate the data, but I hear you. The ones that are with us, if we're saying now that we have the structures, the curriculum in place, the assessments, all of these pieces that really make for all of the conditions, then we should be seeing the gains. For our regular education students, we have to track that. For our English learners, that means that there are added supports that we have to provide, certainly for our special education students. And so I think it's a matter of us disaggregating it. But I hear you. I wholeheartedly hear you, Julio.
And I do understand we have a very heavy lift because we're trying not just to get the students, but we're trying to teach the teachers a new program that they haven't done before. So that part I certainly understand.
Okay, Kim.
Oh, okay, Kim, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Solid.
Just to follow up, Julio's question, can you speak to, I know it's not our main measure of following, but can you speak to the ELA growth measure? And would that be something that would be helpful as we're tracking that as we're moving along?
So we have both. Actually, let me see if I have that data with me around the growth measures for ELA. Hang on.
So while you're doing that, I guess, and I'm not trying to be pain and harp on the parent part, but these performance indicators or growth indicators, as a parent, do I know them? Do I get a chance to chart at home the growth, or do I know the standard that my child is performing on? And am I getting, I guess, trained to be able to track this as technically as you are tracking it?
So there are Smarter Balance reports, right, that are produced for individual students that are provided so that as a parent, we would know where a child is at.
You mean the parent, the one that I would have to bring to you so you can explain to me what they sent me?
So that is the one that I am referring to. What we are asking in terms of now that we're going to be using the FMP, we're going to be encouraging teachers to use it as a tool that should guide the teacher conference, right? To be able to explain to parents in very simple terms, this is what it means, right? These are the types of, this is at the rate that the child is reading. These are the types of errors that your child is making. So there's a lot of great information that comes out of that assessment that, again, we're going to be working to say, let's use it as a tool for meaningful conversation with parents, and also give you like the child's independent reading. I want to speak about the previous question about the percentages that you're speaking about.
Sure.
And I think that it would be simple then to work with the data department in being able to do a comparison analysis by grade cohort, right? Because when you look at the data and we're looking at that 22.1%, right? Those kids right now, the kids that scored at 22.1%, those are the kids that right now are in 4th grade. Just like the ones that score 18.3%, those are the kiddos now that are in 5th grade. So it would be worthwhile to actually do an in-depth analysis to say, how are those kids now performing? That, even that 24.1, right, back in 15, let's take a look. Those were the kids that were in 3rd grade back then. How are they performing now that they're in 7th grade? So I think that's the kind of data that I think will be useful if I'm understanding your question correctly.
All right, I'm sorry again, but, and I hate to use Stone Age analogies, but wouldn't, if a student, I guess, achieve proficiency, wouldn't we know that, and wouldn't that show up in other subjects? For example, if I'm struggling reading, then naturally I'm not going to be able to read my science book or to participate
Yes.
right. So wouldn't
Yes.
that show up? So I guess, again, for me, I'm just trying to figure out, and I know that you can't have this concrete strategy on how we're going to create students, but how do you create the love of learning, the love of reading? How do you intrigue a student to want to go above and beyond what their assignment was, and to achieve and not obtain, but to really focus on mastery. So and then, are there attempts to establish book clubs and other kind of supports outside of school for reading? And
So if I can answer that question. So if you look at kind of this slide, the two components here of the classroom environment and the stations and centers really highlight some important observations that you've made. So when we talk about classroom environment, the role of the teacher becomes more of a facilitator of the learning process than that of just delivery of message and instruction. And they rotate around stages to engage learning. But it also allows them to actually differentiate the learning for individual students, which is kind of uniquely different of how we kind of see it now. But it allows the teachers to actually work with that higher achieving student, but at the same time work with the student that's struggling in an environment that actually feels safe and engaging. So when we talk about stagings, teachers can be as creative as creating project-based inquiries, as well as how can they actually work as a group to actually look at complex texts and take apart a piece of Shakespeare, let's say. But allows for creative ways in order to engage in that learning environment. And how do you actually create this classroom environment to express the love of reading throughout the curriculum? So it takes some professional learning for our teachers to get there, but it allows the teacher to actually use that craft of teaching and really engage the student in the learning process. But to Dr. Negron's initial points, it's going to take a lot of observations and making sure that the teachers constantly monitoring the students' progress and growth so that they can actually be proactive in addressing obstacles and challenges they may face. And that can not just be for the students who are actually struggling. It can also be the gifted students that actually get bored and say, I need something more challenging to move forward. So, and you might have that in that group, but this kind of approach allows for teachers to actually really address different learning styles, different learning abilities, as well as, students where they're at in their reading levels.
You're coaching over here.
Oh, sure. Ms. Daly? Sorry.
Haven't been here in a minute. All this fancy technology. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I have a question about the non-Hartford resident in the 17-18 Hartford proficiency. Can somebody kind of like walk me through the way that the data is bucketed out in this particular section, the all students versus non-Hartford residents? This would be in the previous. Yeah, two slides back.
She's here. Abby, can you join us? But where are you?
2 slides back from this one, just kind of parsing out the Hartford proficiency data for 2017, 2018.
Hold on. My slides are a little off whack here. Nope. Let me go back here. Here.
Bottom right hand corner.
Yes, so, good evening. So following across on the chart, so Dr. TR explained the all students, the students with disabilities, and English language learners. The difference between the last two bars would be Hartford residents versus non-Hartford residents. So it's disaggregating students who their resident town is Hartford, and percent of those students who met the grade level expectation in 3rd grade on the Smarter Balanced. So that would be level 3 and above, 3 or 4 on Smarter Balanced. The percent of those kids who met that level versus the percent of, you could say, suburban students who met that level of achievement. So comparing the two groups.
So students within our district, so magnet.
But there are students. They're Hartford Public Schools students, but attending through either open choice or magnet, yes.
I guess, so I always beat the drum on this because I just feel like the bar that is set for our students is just, it's a different bar. It's at a different level. Not really sure what's packed into that besides institutional racism. But I'm wondering if there are other ways that we can look at this, right? Is it the assessments that are causing our outcomes to be so disparately different from like state outcomes? Is it, I don't know, I guess I'm trying to get more at like the actual cause, right? So like we are really like deep into trying to treat the effects, right, of our students not being on level, but I'm wondering like what causes our students to have this disparate difference in terms of like reading level achievement, right? And then I'm also wondering if we have like intense interventions that are individualized for students, or is it because we have whole classrooms of students who are below, I mean, so according to this data, about 3/4 of our students are not performing at grade level, right? So does that mean that we are within those classroom environments teaching to the 3/4 of our population, or do we have individualized interventions for students who are underachieving? I know that that was like a lot, like saying and asking, but I'm just really curious about root causes, and also about the way that we're approaching what should be really like urgent, intentional, and individualized interventions for these students.
So I'm going to take a stab at the root causes as, again, as still considering myself a newbie, kind of looking in. And the fact that, walking in and learning that it wasn't until recently that there's actually a curriculum that is updated, that is aligned to standards, that to me was alarming coming in. And then later to learn that often when there is the curriculum, then not all the schools have the resources that they need to be able to deliver that curriculum. That was also like an aha moment for me. In addition to, again, like inequities in regards to what has been offered in the past. So I don't know if that's how, I'm just new, taking a look at all kinds of data and trying to tease it apart. So I know that the experience of others has been a lot longer than mine, but that definitely for me was like a red flag. Knowing that many urban districts have similar struggles, but I've never seen the gaps to be as wide. And I guess I was focusing on those components as perhaps some of the contributing factors.
So I would also add, and Karen, I know you alluded to something at the beginning, right? The fact the institutionalization, of
Institutional racism.
yes, and other barriers. And so while I know that Dr. Negron alluded to the internal barriers, right? These were barriers that we either created and didn't allow access to. When you reference it against the state, we know that there are other students in other towns that are not Alliance districts, because I will speak to the growth that gets to Kim's question around growth. We are comparing students that start in a very different place, right? And so that's an added element that we have to think through in terms of access, even pre, right? Kindergarten and pre-K, right? So we have to keep that in mind. But when we have a comparison to other Alliance districts, right? And when you look at the data and when you look at the growth, I will say that in literacy, and I know it's been a while that we looked at this data, and when I sent it to you, it wasn't official, but it is now. Hartford did double the state's rate of growth. And when we look at the other Alliance districts, we tripled the Alliance district's rate of growth. And so when you look at the state's rate of growth at 5.3, Hartford's rate of growth last year was 11.6, right? And so that means that, we are accelerating in terms of the growth. Yes, we are nowhere near where we should be. Granted, we hands down acknowledge that, but in terms of the growth, when we pull it apart and compare ourselves to other systems, we can see that we rank third out of 33 Alliance districts in terms of the change in ELA last year. And so while I'm not waving a flag around where we are, the 22% proficiency, when we look at growth, we know that there's improvement there. Kim, I don't know that answers your question, but I can look into the specific. Well, I have the specifics, right? We know that we went from 43% to 54.8% in terms of the growth, and so that's the 11% growth for ELA.
Yeah, I think that's important because when we talk about accountability, I think that's the piece where we can think about how we hold our staff and ourselves accountable, because to Mr. Flores' point earlier, you know, it sometimes it's confusing in terms of like, well, different students will have different durations of time with this new structure in place, but us being able to see as we move as a district with all our kids, how is it this is something that maybe can complement this as a measure. So I definitely think this is the right measure that we're focusing in on, but I just was thinking about it would be helpful to understand how we are looking in terms of those growth measures as well.
And the other piece that I will add, and we've gone back and forth around which one. Is it the proficiency? Is it the growth? We've heard lots of conversation at the state level, right? And we've heard the commissioner speak to the fact that, you know, it's the growth that we have to focus on. But, you know, the proficiency is part of our, you know, next generation accountability standard that the state, you know, outlines for us as well. And so it's a struggle that we have, which is why if you, you know, kind of remember this other list of indicators, you know, it's included, both of them are included there. But we also want to look at, you know, our English learners and how, you know, what their proficiency is, not through SBAC alone, right? Other assessments as well. So we can continue or unpack it even further in terms of the growth. We have all of that data because even our principals set targets around not just the proficiency, but the growth as well. And our teachers do as well, individual teachers.
Thank you. Sure. So I think that for me it's just really important, and I appreciate the stab that you took at my question. That was a really like huge and difficult one that probably didn't have an answer, right? Around resources and curriculum, the idea that maybe our students are inherently less intelligent, that's just not true, right? And they're probably more intelligent maybe than some of their counterparts in the suburbs, because despite less resources, curriculum that's not aligned, like they still actually are achieving, right? So I just want to be really clear about that, and I hope that we scream that from mountaintops whenever we have an opportunity to, and we're asking for more resources and that sort of thing. But the other question that I had around intense and intentional interventions, I'm just wondering, like, is that individualized, or are we looking at whole classrooms and just kind of teaching to the standard level for students, or are we looking at what each individual student needs? I don't know if I'm asking this right.
No, I mean, intervention.
Because when you have a large group of students and all of them need intervention, like, does the intervention no longer become individualized? Is it like, oh, the classroom is doing this thing, or do students still get the one-on-one? And I know I'm asking this in a climate that like resources are scarce, but I'm just wondering, like, is there like a plan that's written up and we look at this person and say, okay, this is what they need in order to move their mark for this academic year?
I think right now we do want to have like a combination of interventions, right? I think like I spoke earlier, within that tier 1, making sure that we are offering tier 2 intervention that's catered to the individual needs of the student within that literacy block of time, but also in addition having those interventions that the district has invested in making available to students, right? Like we're doing the iReady intervention, the Lexia intervention, but again, making sure that we're bringing those into the classroom as well, so that there it becomes more individualized.
So it's a combination.
A combination of the two of them.
Thank you.
But what I want to make sure is that we clarify that we are moving away from having students being pulled out of the classroom and missing instruction. And so we're trying to identify the areas of improvement for the student and how we can modify within a tier 2, within the structure, within the classroom, right? And so we talk about the tiers. Tier 1 is what all of the students are going to experience and have access to, and for some students, that's not enough. And so we think about Tier 2, which is a smaller group of students. But we are saying we are not going to pull all students out of the classroom, that support has to happen in that setting.
I mean, I think that my question was less about like how it was done, and just that, okay, so for instance, like when my twins went to school in elementary, they were both identified for intervention. I'm glad they're not here because I'm telling their business. They were both pulled for intervention. And it was small group instruction that was held in the classroom, right? So they had small groups based upon your reading level, so kind of like met everyone where they were, and like they had like particular assignments around that. But each of them was still written out an individual plan with specific goals for that kid, right? So even though they're doing it Tier 1, Tier 2, however it happens, it's still individualized for that kid. And I'm just wondering if, because we have such a large population of students who need intervention, if we don't do that individually for students as much. I mean, and I guess this is also a standards question too, because depending on what school community that my kids are in, it depends on whether or not they're identified as like high achievers or whether or not they need interventions, right? So I'm just wondering, this is probably a different workshop. Okay? I'm gonna leave that. I'm gonna leave my questions.
All right.
There.
I can share. No, first I had to say that if you ever spend time in our kindergarten classrooms, this wouldn't be a shock to you. If you know where our kids are when they arrive, that is a community issue that we have to figure out a way that we're working with some entity in this community to give our kids something. Just the language access is just, this does not, I just was speaking to someone last night where, I want to say a kindergartner maybe, don't even know their last name. This is an issue that we have to figure out a way with community partners or some to address the access to our young children before they even come to us. Because we will continue to see this, or we're just gonna have to work triple, double, however much is harder, because our community needs our help prior to kindergarten. But to Karen's point, yes, it's some schools that you have your data, your grade level meetings, and even the kids that aren't identified anywhere, you see the strands, you see what they're not making. For instance, if they're not identifying like numbers on a number line, so each kid is mapped out, and you see where this kid is and where you have to get him to. You're getting coached on how to get each kid to where they need to be. So it's happening in some schools, and then I went to other schools that it wasn't even a million. So, but it does exist. It is able to be assessed. But I guess depending on your school and the leadership and how it's structured, some schools have it and some schools don't. Are using it and some schools don't, because I believe the testing is there, how they're using the data. So I've seen it, that each and every student, whether they're identified or not, they're mastering this strand, and it's a plan for every one of them to get to the next level.
And so and thank you, because I appreciate your experiences in the classroom. So I assume that part of what we're doing here in terms of like having a district-wide curriculum is also like district-wide implementation, so that is also standardized. But this is work that's beginning, right?
Yes.
Okay.
A universal approach, not only with the curriculum and the practice, but also with the monitoring structures, hence the data teams. And I know what you're referencing. You're describing, Shantae, a data team process in which they get together, they look at the students, and so that exists in some of our schools, not in all.
But it will,
which is why we have that as one of our major actions.
Yeah.
Ms. Foto?
Thanks. I came in late, but since we flipped back to the slide, I actually just wanted to make a request to see these numbers down here in the 2017-18 Hartford Profession E also broken down by race. I think we might have asked for that in a previous workshop where we saw these numbers. I think that would be helpful as well if we have that.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a tweet or a comment. I think that some of the achievement gap has a lot to do, and it's a follow-up to Ms. Browdy's point, that with the environments that the children come from, and I think this makes the work that Ms. Black-Brown was describing before extremely important and needs to be lifted up and expanded. The work that we do with the parents and the communities. And a comment that's sort of a peeve is that I don't always like when we talk about comparisons, because I don't want us to fall into the trap of thinking, well, there's other people that are doing poorly, so it's okay if we're doing better than they are, even though we're doing very poorly.
Just one last thing. Sure.
Ms. Allen.
So when Mrs. Brody brought up understand where the kids came from, as some other people did, I think it would be remiss on my part not to say, could we possibly at one point talk about how we are receiving data from some of those other places and those other community partnerships? The kids are coming from different spots. Some have data, some don't. But as we're talking about how we can utilize data more effectively, if we have some of that assessment information already for our kids when they walk into kindergarten day one, I think that it would be extremely helpful and perhaps something for us to take a look at, because we do obviously have some of our own pre-K classrooms that it should be an interesting exercise to compare those kids who are HPS kids at pre-K that become HPS kids at K, and if we're seeing differences there. But not for tonight. I think we have a lot already for tonight, but if we could at one point
Absolutely.
deal with that, yeah. Thank you.
So, before we try to move on, so I'm going to try to usher us past this slide. I will say, though, speaking to Ms. Taylor's point, Ms. Brody's point, and Mr. Flores' point, the reason why I continuously ask about parents is because this issue is outside. I think the heavier lift is outside of school, not inside of school. But what I'm concerned about is that institutional approach. Because if we had, and I'm not trying to disrespect any community-based organization, but if you had quality-based organizations out there, then we wouldn't be making a plea in here to try to find quality organizations out there to support learning and support reading. But this is a cultural issue. And so I wonder how we are taking steps to approach that aspect of our issue. And so, again, if I have a philosophy that is not conducive to learning, and it's selfish in its nature, and it's counterproductive, and that's the philosophy in which I am engaging my young children, my young brothers, daughters, nieces, nephews, so forth and so on, then how do you counteract that to develop the positive skills that students need? For example, if we are talking about proficiency in reading, we are talking about developing a love of reading. And so how do we approach that less institutional and more practical in that sense? Because again, when we're talking about our communities are anti-institution. So they don't necessarily want to conform, hence why we live a counterculture that we live. So again, and I said this before, if I refer to finance as cream, but you refer to it as finance, we're having the same conversation. We're just using two different dialects or two different languages, and so we're passing in the night. So how do you culturally relate to students, families, in order to encourage and inspire education? You don't have to answer that now. You can pause that. But we're going to continue. I don't know what slide this is. Teaching and learning, rigorous instruction.
Yes, we kind of went back on a slide, but
oh, did we?
Just want to remind us that these are, again, in alignment with the next generation accountability indicators, and know that the state has already identified for us to target through the year 2030. And the state, for example, Julio, I think this gets to your point. The state, for example, for SBAC achievement by the year 2030 has us at 75%. Right, so even when we look at the state and their target for us, realistically, in year 2030, still we're at 75% at or above proficiency. So again, I'm not downplaying it, but I'm just speaking to the fact that we're aligning it with the metrics also at the state level that are obviously connected to their standards and ESSA standards as well.
All right, I'm not gonna belabor that point, but we're gonna put a pin in that. At that point, and then I guess it was slide 11. Who's on the slide?
9.
Oh, you are?
Here.
You're doing the slide?
We're going back to,
This one right
we're
here?
right here.
Okay.
Yeah, we're moving to major goal 2.
Yep.
Graduation.
Correct.
So the other goal under teaching and learning is around the graduation. And while we know that, the reporting is 1 year behind, the release of the 2017 cohort's 4-year graduation rate does show a decline there. We don't have the scores. We don't get them until, is it? April, the spring. And so for this past year that we just finished. So what we wanted to do here is spend time talking about all the other indicators that we connect to supporting graduation. And so wanted to take a deeper dive around math as a supporter of making sure that our students graduate on time and ready when they leave us. So going to ask that we dig a little deeper into math in our efforts to connect math to our graduation goal. And we're looking at PSAT data, and then also we're going to look into SBAC data as well.
So again, more data that we're using to kind of inform how our students are doing and how we are doing in servicing them to be college, career, and life ready. So they took the PSAT for the first time back in the spring, and 21% of our students achieve at the college and career readiness benchmark in math. I know that we do not want to make comparisons, but I do want to lift something in that 21%. So although we're significantly behind the state, I do want to point out that the state conducted a study where they tried to do a correlation to see, based on the students' performance in 8th grade on SBAC math, could they then predict where students would perform in the PSAT. So at that time, actually, the state had projected that only about 6.9 of our students would have met the college career readiness benchmark. And we were very pleased to then get the results that we exceeded that. Based on that correlation, only 6.9% of our kids would have met that benchmark, but we actually had 21% of our kids that met it, which I believe speaks significantly about our curriculum in math through 8, because I think it's starting to show that the kids are walking into high school ready for, more and more kids are walking in ready for Algebra 1. We're not where we need to be, but I think that's promising about the curriculum that is being employed. And if we go to the next slide, here again, you will see that the district, it's actually outperforming in terms of the gains that are being seen in math. And again, perform the alliance districts and also the state. So I think that's something to be celebrated.
Mrs. Glanville?
Is there any correlation that you've looked at or considered as to when the Common Core started being, like with the cohorts that we're measuring, when that started being implemented, like when they changed math all around, like made it align?
2010.
Yeah, but as it relates to Hartford, this would be last year was year 3 of working through transitioning through Common Core, and now we're fully aligned. And so think about when Common Core first lifted back in 2010, and 3 years ago for Hartford. And now we can say we're fully, curriculum and assessments fully in alignment. Just to highlight a few points here around the data, again, wait, do we have, let me just double check, oh, we don't have this. We know that we have a 3.1, on to the left here, 3.1 increase in terms of our proficiency, but when we look at the growth, again, we know that we outpaced the Alliance districts, and while we saw 11 percentage points in growth in ELA, in math, we see 9.3%. That we attained 9.3% more of our growth targets compared to 3% in all of the other Alliance districts. So, we know that there's a solid foundation that we have in math. And the reason why we wanted to make the connection here is because, up until 8th grade with the SBAC, we know that that's an opportunity for us to connect it to the Algebra 1. And we believe here that we all know that Algebra 1 is a gatekeeper course, right? We know that it's clearly connected to students being ready or not to be successful in high school, and then of course, in college as well.
So in the next slide, I just wanted to highlight some of the work that has been happening at the district level that is leading us to those gains that we're seeing, and how we are now starting to outperform in terms of the growth rates. So now there is aligned curriculum that's available in all schools, K-8, and that's the Eureka Math that is being implemented, as well as Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, again, across the entire district. And also having systematic Tier 2 interventions that are also available at all schools for mathematics. In addition to that, there are those topic assessments and the interim assessments that, again, are being used to constantly measure how students are performing in the curriculum and what is the level of support that is necessary. And then connecting that to the classroom level in making sure that there's a very clear set of high expectations in terms of the way that curriculum needs to be developed. And that it's observed in the mathematics look for document that has been developed, and it's been used across the district. There's also specific support that is being provided to make sure that teachers that are responsible for delivering the math curriculum, that we continue to build their capacity to actually be able to do so, particularly at the elementary level, right? That people are have those K-6 certifications and not necessarily are specialists around math, but it's how do we use then the directors, the assistant directors, now the structure of the ELE coaches, to continue to work with teachers on best practices around math instruction.
I'm sorry, I have a question. You say that you have to build capacity with teachers. And so I'm just wondering, and it's going to sound kind of ignorant, but what does that mean? are we training teachers how to teach math, or is it how to teach it better, or shortcuts, or being creative? Like, what does that mean?
So let me explain. When you consider certifications, right? So there would be a certification for mathematics 712. So we know that that certification, if you have it, you have invested numerous hours in your college preparation, actually in the learning of how to teach mathematics. But when you look at, for example, K-6 certification, right? That often is a certification that most of our elementary teachers would have. That K-6 certification, it's wide. It allows you to teach any content within the K-6 spectrum, but it's not going to be as specialized to mathematics as a person that has a dual certification that might be K-6 certified but also has a 712 mathematics certification. So I think what has been very wise that Hartford has done as a district is that the folks at central office are very cognizant that, again, we have to continue to work with our teachers at the elementary level to make sure that we have the best teachers in front of kids that are equipped to teach mathematics, particularly, again, if the certification is a K-6 certification.
And so in that lens, we apply to literacy
Yes.
as well. And then you add the piece around standards, and we know that as it relates to math, the complexity of it, where our teachers, we want our teachers to be experts in not only the conceptual, the procedural, the application of mathematics. And so there's a lot of capacity building that has to happen there so that the delivery, what is delivered, is in alignment with the standards.
All right, I hate to nitpick, but going back to Karen's point, so is it standard again, or is it that we have on our base schools, K through 6, teachers that really don't have a full grasp on the content and thus can't meet the standard?
We have teachers, as it relates to the certification, we have most, I want to say, of our K-6 teachers that have K-6 certifications.
Okay.
We've spent time, for example, last year we spent time with a cohort of schools. I don't know if you recall the ANET, Achievement Network, consultants that we had. And so there was a cohort of schools, and that is what they did with the math teachers, right? It was exploring not only content, but, instruction, how to teach math. And I know that there was time that teachers had to spend on learning math and the concepts, the procedures, and how to apply it. Before then, they could, deliver the instruction to our students.
Ms. Allen.
My question is, in the past, we've talked about our either shortage or challenge with math teachers. So since this has been pulled out as this is one of our underlying ways we're going to get to the graduation rate, can we talk about how we're addressing that? As I would assume that would be really critical to this strategy.
Do you have the rates? Because I know this was it was a better year for us, and we can get you exactly how many especially around math retention, and especially around math in middle school. It was a positive year. So I can definitely get you the data, because that's something that, Mario Carullo is monitoring for us and was very intentional around. And by the way, when he does engage math teachers in finding out, what works, one of the feedback pieces is around the capacity building and the support that our teachers feel they are getting within the models. And so I know that Dr. Negron alluded to some of the pieces on this slide, but we wanted to really highlight at the school level, if you see the center column here, the professional learning structures for our teachers. And that's something that we know worked when we engaged with the Achievement Network, the structure, and so we wanted to leverage that throughout the system. Sure.
Proceed, I'm sorry. Oh.
Yes.
Where's that thing? Yes,
I have a question, goes beyond curriculum. And it seems to me that now, when you get to high school, there's a sort of rebelliousness that kicks in.
For the student?
And Mr. Stalling spoke earlier about how do we get kids to develop a love for learning. And my thought about high school is how do you get them to develop a love for education? That I know from what I know of my own son and his friends and so forth, is kids who are pretty smart, see no reason why they should graduate from high school, often just drop out. And my experience is that they have not been receiving the appropriate counseling in the schools, the guidance that they should be getting as to what they're going to do with this, what are they going to do with their lives after they leave high school. And I'd like to know what we're doing about that, because I think, especially in high school, I think it happens in all grades, but especially in high school, it goes well beyond curriculum.
That's the truth.
So I can speak to a couple things, Julio, and then I know I can let the teams continue to add. But you're talking about from the guidance perspective, we are working to make sure that our developmental guidance program starts before they get to high school, right? And so by the time they get to 5th, 6th, and then throughout the middle years, exploring the interests of our students so that by the time they get to high school, they can be better informed. That's one of the pieces. That's where, if you recall, I think 1 or 2 board meetings ago, we talked about the Naviance and making sure that we leverage that systemically throughout the district, because it's a tool that can help in that process. The other piece of it, and you didn't necessarily reference, but I think it's important, it's around the supports for our students. I don't think it's just about students not knowing what the options are for them beyond high school. I think it's also making sure that they have the supports. And then when it comes to instruction, it's the relevance that we have to work with our teachers around making sure that our students feel that what they are learning is connected to their world and their environment, and that there's a purpose. And sometimes is as simple, I don't want to minimize it, but sometimes it is as simple as a teacher, when the learning targets are discussed with the students, that there's mention to why does this matter, right? What's the so what for me as a student in our district, as a student that may or may not have aspirations for college, but that there's relevance in why it is that I need to learn around the angles in algebra, for example, or why it is that I need to learn how to read this text close, why is it that I need to learn how to interact deeply with a text. So there is not one, it's not just a one answer. I think is a multitude of elements that kind of come together. Don't know if anything else that the team wants to add, but there are tools.
Yep.
Certainly the adults, and then the connection that the student needs to feel that they have with the learning.
I think one of the critical elements that research supports, and just by experience being in the high school level, is relationships that students make with the adults in the building, and what has proven successful is actually when students actually have an adult advocate or mentor that's going to be there to kind of coach them through those difficult moments or moments that they struggle, and point them in the right directions to become and build that tenacity in order to get to that graduation stage. But those relationships and those advocates and those mentors are key in making sure that these young adolescents actually get the supports and really channel their energy in the appropriate places to make them successful to their high school experience.
And my experience has been that often the adults don't know how to maintain that relationship and how to be that mentor or that role model or whatever it is we're looking for them to do. I know in the case of my boys with both of them, that we have identified people within the system that could fulfill that role because the kids have developed a connection with them, but somehow it seems to me that the adult is failing at it. So how do we get them engaged in this?
I also just wanted to add I don't know if this is on. There it is. I think it's also critical that that the adults within our district genuinely believe in the ability and capability of the students that they interact with. Even if they are not outwardly expressing it, people can tell when you don't believe in them. A lot of times we stifle the talent and the creativity out of our young people within our system. And sometimes we look at the lack of unprofessionalism really nonchalantly within our district. But our students can feel that. They can sense that. I had two 11-year-olds who came home and told me, I don't think they expect a lot from us here at this school. Two 11-year-olds came home and told me that. You know, I mean, and they seem to have pretty decent relationships with the adults at their school, but like that was the takeaway. I had a son who was a trumpet player. He'd played since 3rd grade, came home and told me, I don't think I want to play that instrument anymore. I mean, music class really isn't that fun. It doesn't seem like the teacher's doesn't care that much about like what the students are doing in class. So like when we see disengagement from our students, sometimes it's because of disengagement in our adults. And maybe that could be something that, I don't know, like we need to think about retention in the way that we treat the individuals that work with our kids every day. And we also need to make sure that they understand how critical it is for them to like fully show up and fully believe. Like if you don't fully believe that our students are capable, then you probably should go someplace else, right? Because they can sense that. I know this is off topic, on topic, but I mean, I really think that that is a big part of it. I'm a Weaver High School graduate. I can think of teachers, Ms. Sharp and Ms. Krause, and I can think of teacher Baba Jihad who really believed in our capability, and like those are people who really stuck with me. And I know what classes where I showed up and people would just give me an A because I was quiet, right? And they weren't really too concerned about what I was or was not doing. And sometimes it really is difficult to manage some of the classroom dynamics. We haven't adequately resourced our schools, which is why we need to constantly be talking about the way that we're funding our schools, the way we're funding our district. Like, you know, as we continue to make cuts, like people in the classroom and in schools feel it, but we have to make sure that we are enforcing a level of professionalism and investment from the adults that are interacting with our students every day, because we're gonna feel it, not just in schools, but like in our city also.
Now, I think this is an important part of professional development for our staff. And I know when my son was in high school, I could go in there and sit down with the assistant principal, Patricia Washington, and I'd leave, wow, she really gets it. But somehow the other people in the school didn't seem to. And now one person can't manage the whole school. So I think we need to get to a different place with those teachers.
Okay, all right. So we'll end there. And
Sorry, I
move
have
on.
one more question.
Go ahead.
I feel very unruly this evening. It's really weird. Okay, so I just wanted to make a really quick point about the connecting math to our graduation goal and like how we see the SBAC gains and the way that it's framed there. To me, the data feels really incomplete, and I would love to be able to see like the actual numbers, like not just our gains, because if it's that Hartford was at 10% and now we're at 13 versus like other districts that may be at like 21, like I would want to see that, you know? I mean, I know that we're really trying to highlight our wins, which I think is great, but I think that we can still highlight that with like a more complete data set. Just from my brain, like that would be helpful for me.
I will send that. I will send it again, that in a way that is highlighted for I'm trying to connect all of the requests that have been made in terms of the data points. So the one that you have already gotten only references where we are, which I think is what you're asking, but it doesn't break it down by subgroup. So I will send it, but give us a little bit so that we can compile it together. Because I'm trying to see if what you're asking, for example, math. We know that we were at 15.5% in math, and we're now at 18.6%. That's not what's...
Yeah, I mean, so it's showing us the rates of change, but I would like to see like what the raw numbers are. Like we can still, I mean, however you want to frame it and highlight it, but I would want to see, in addition to the rates of change, like where have we moved from, especially when we're putting it side by side with other comparative data sets. Like I would love to be able to see, does that make like a full picture of the data? Thank you.
Just want to make sure that I understand. So as we looked at literacy, right, so we have where we were in terms of the data trend and where we are now. So we have this same slide for math, but because it wasn't a major goal, we didn't highlight here, but we have it. And so I just want to make sure that that's what you're referencing, the holistic group and where they are.
So for
math.
The math and reading, that's all.
Yeah, I have it for reading, but.
Yeah, just whenever I see a chart like this, I don't only want to see like the rate of change like in chart form. I would like, so if it has gone from,
Corresponding bar,
yeah, I want not even the corresponding bar, but like incorporated in the data. So I would want to know where we started and where we ended, right? So if there's a 3.1 rate of change, if that means we went from 10% to 13.1, like I would want to see that, right? And if that means that the Alliance District on average went from 20% to 21.3, I want to see that. I want to be able to see like the full picture of the data for, especially when you're comparing, right? Does that make good sense?
It does.
And the same for the
growth?
Yep, for the growth. Yeah, I'd want to be able to see. I mean, because like this means a lot here, right? But maybe it doesn't mean as much if we were significantly behind or significantly ahead, right? So I'd want to get the full picture of the data.
But that's what I was going
No, on the bottom of the slide, do you see 15 point?
Yeah, we've unpacked the data.
Okay.
Yeah, I see that, but I want to see.
I've only sent the data to the board in graphs.
Okay.
I shouldn't say matrix. This is a matrix, not in bar graphs. I can do that, but I also want to make sure that I filter it through all the other requests in terms of the subgroups as well. So I think I get it. Yeah, absolutely.
So down here, so like the data is here. So we, from 15.5 to 18.6, it's there for that. But what about the Alliance District, right? Because we have it here as like comparative data, I would want to be able to have that information for each one of these for a complete data set for my brain. Thank you.
Yeah.
My brain.
In my big head.
Not at all. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next slide, school culture and climate. As we do that and as we're transitioning, I just want to say again, from a community standpoint, life is math, and it's important that we have a holistic approach for our community and our parents in terms of not just supporting math, but rediscovering either from a philosophical standpoint or just from a practical standpoint or even an academic standpoint, the many benefits of math and how we apply that and how we that discipline shows up in other aspects of our lives. So with that said, Madam Superintendent.
School culture and climate, one of 4 priorities, and so we'll look at chronic absenteeism. And so last time we tried to get through chronic absenteeism, we weren't able to. What I hope that we can, well, let's see how far we can get. No, not at all. I just want to explain the reason why we're not digging into all 4, because we really wanted to take our time with regard to teaching and learning and now with school culture and climate. So we should be able to dig deeper into this. But in case you're wondering what happened to operational effectiveness, what happened to family and community engagement, we will do those in other workshops. So in relation to school culture and climate and major goal number 5, which is to decrease our chronic absenteeism by 7 percentage points, just let you, give you a minute to immerse yourself here in this slide. So, oh, go ahead. No?
I was going to try to ask you off record.
Oh, off record, okay. Where we are in terms of our chronic trend, so this is where we are, where we ended last year, knowing that our target was 20.8, and so we increased in terms of our chronic absenteeism. We'll speak to the why and the now what, but I also wanted to reference here on the right the projected progression for us in terms of our decreasing, meaning improving our attendance to schools. And the last graphic here is unpacking for every grade, and you can see right where our points of concern clearly are. We see kindergarten here at 28%, and then we see in our high school, particularly in our 9th grade, which speaks to, when we unpack this 9th grade data, we have students that are into the 9th grade for the first time, and we also have our 9th grade repeaters. And we have this data completely unpacked by students, how many credits they have, how many credits they're missing to be on target, how many times they've missed, why they have missed, and I know that Dr. Sellers is going to speak to some of the structures in place, but so this is the high level, right, of where we are. We also know that, last year and moving forward, that there's an expectation that we have data that's accurate data, and so I will be completely frank with you. When we dug deep with some of our schools and really looked into our data and our numbers, we noticed that some schools were not being consistent in tracking our students and in taking attendance. And we learned that Power School automatically, if a teacher doesn't take attendance, Power School does what?
Absent.
It marks the student present.
Does it really?
Yes.
Wow.
And so, think about that, right? If a teacher doesn't take attendance, then the system automatically assumes that the student is here. And so we're now saying that everyone at all times has to take attendance in all classes, because we want to make sure that we have a clean and authentic data set. So that's something for us to keep in mind, when we think about root causes, one of many root causes. So I'll stop there, and if there are questions, or I can kind of move on to what and why and what we're doing about it.
Can you clearly define what chronic absenteeism is?
Students that miss 10% or more of their school year. And so if you take a month, if we have students, if there are, 10 days, 20 days in a month, right? So even 10% of that already, a student is chronically absent.
So 2 days in a month?
Think about it. But then, the clock continues, to expand. And so then if 2 months go by, right, and the student is not absent anymore, that chronic absenteeism for that student may show that there's improvement. If the student happened to go on vacation, which we have, by the way, cases of families that go on vacation and students are already chronically absent.
Does this include like accumulated tardies that turn into absences?
No.
I thought it was like something like 3 tardies and then they mark you.
Yes.
Is that
Not
a thing?
anymore.
No, not anymore?
That's not a thing anymore?
Okay.
There currently is no such policy.
No policy, okay. I think I know that.
Wait, since when?
Well, I remember it.
Oh, okay, all right.
Right.
They equaled out class.
Right.
I know of a district. I know of a district in the last 6 years that
Right.
did have that.
Right.
Yes.
So,
Can I just clarify one thing on that? Except for if you have a school, for example, where you have a 7-period day, the student needs to be in attendance for the most of the school day in order to be counted as present. So they would need to be there for 4 periods of the day to be present. If you have an 8-period day and it's 4 and 4, I missed 4, I'm here for 4, it's in the benefit of the student, so they mark the student as present if they're here for the 4 periods in an 8-period day.
And what about I don't know. Yeah, my daughter's school is like
Yeah, which one?
Tuesdays and Thursday have certain class, and Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So it just has to be more than half of the day?
50% or more.
More, okay.
The day that they're in attendance.
Okay, because
For
it's
the
not
high
8
schools,
periods
they
a day,
do
they
period
break out.
attendance. The elementary schools do daily attendance, so whether they're here or not, and they handle the tardies if they show up.
Okay.
So they are taking attendance at every period.
It's a requirement.
Yes.
I've had cases where, my child has been late because of an appointment, and I'll get a call that, where is he? And he's at school now.
Or it'll say, your student was absent today from periods 1, 2, right? Like it'll name the periods out. So you're like, where were you? I was at advisory, I was meeting. Well, you better go fix that, because it's gonna tell you what period. And then it's up to it's just basically communication in the building. I was with my guidance counselor, then I have to go my teacher and figure that out. But it'll tell you exactly what periods they were absent.
And one of the tools that we have new this year across the system is, the RISE dashboard that gives us live data. But that the dashboard is only as good as how accurate and timely the data entry is. And so, and I know that I'm getting into a little bit of Dr. Sellers' conversation around the district attendance team, and one of the monitoring pieces that we have around the accuracy of data entry. This is additional data that I wanted to highlight here. I haven't looked at this before, but I wanted to look into the first 5, attendance rates for the year. Given that, we had an increased focus around attendance. And so as you can see, by day 5, that's a big difference in terms of the students that are coming to school. And so we always talk about when do we start, when do we not start the school year?
Well, I'm just trying to understand the data. You said, is this comparing it to last year, or this is just
this year.
the percentage of students, of our students that attended on those first 5 days? Okay.
And we actually do have data for last year, but when you think about the possibility that, there was no integrity in terms of the data, we compare it, and we did compare. And there were slight improvements, but not significant. So we can't tell whether or not it was because data was being tracked accurately or not. We know that this is accurate data.
What happens when a student has been suspended?
In terms of?
Still not absent.
Is he chronically absent if he's been suspended?
I wanted to come, but I'm suspended,
So here you see, I wanted to lift that as well, Julio. That when you look at the aggregate, 1% of the absences are due to out-of-school suspensions for our students. This is not for the last 6-7 days of school. This is last year. And then 1,500 students had OSSs last year, and that's an average suspension with an average suspension of 1.5. And so that is just 1% of our student population, but nonetheless, that translates into 98 more students would have had positive attendance and they were not in out-of-school suspension. I know that Dr. Sellers could speak to when students get suspended and the impact on attendance.
Right. And that's some of the other work we're doing in climate and culture, recognize, using our restorative approaches and practices, recognize that we need to take a different approach to student discipline. Missing school, it's no secret, has a huge impact on academic achievement, and we really have to look at other means of helping students understand the error of their ways, pulling them closer rather than using exclusionary practices to try to get through to them. And, I'm confident as we move forward that we're implementing our restorative approaches and practices. We're adding more schools to a new cohort. And really, I think as Mr. Flores alluded to, really helping the adults in the building understand how to make connections with young people, how to really work towards healing, shaping behavior in ways that are positive and proactive and really reduce the risk that a student is going to be removed from the learning environment.
So, I guess, all right, I can get with that, but I guess my question is, well, first let me ask this, in terms of truancy, how many days does a student have to miss before they're considered truant, and do they keep their seat in that school if they're truant year-round? And then two, what are you doing to make school fun? I mean, because if you think about it, from just, if you look at the freshman year, that can mean a lot of different things. That can mean, for example, I have a freshman and I have a sophomore now, but last year my freshman doesn't have good time management skills and organizational skills. And so, at some point, the year is going to become overwhelming because now you either procrastinated too long and now all the stuff is on your plate and you have to do it all, or because you're not organized, you're missing things. And so from high school, that is a total different prospect from middle school and everything else. And so how are we preparing students for that, that venture? And then again, the standard question, how do you make it fun? And then looking at the statistics from the city, 36.1% are coming from the Northeast, 1260. And that suggests a subculture issue. I mean, you can even go to the Northwest and say, well, there's Caribbean heritage and there's a whole Caribbean subculture there. But when I look at this, and this from my mental recollection of the city, this 36.1, that is we can't reduce that number from just a technical approach alone.
Correct.
And so I guess that's kind of my question. And so that's what I mean when how you make school fun.
Sure.
That's what I mean.
Well, that's probably another workshop in and of itself too,
Yes.
but, what I can tell you that gains in any of these areas are gonna require gains in every single area. So that's literacy, mathematics, and, that's part of what leadership does. That's part of what principals do. Principals are called principals because they are the principal teacher in the building. That's actually where the term came from. So as for me, when I was in the classroom, I'm not afraid to use the F word. I made sure that my students had fun every day and they learned how much fun that learning could be. That's what I mean by the F word.
Oh.
So,
Fun, that was fun.
but learning has to be fun. And, I taught high school, so I taught 6 periods a day, 6 shows a day. And if the curriculum isn't interesting, you better be interesting. So these are dispositions that I'm confident that this team can infuse in our leaders and help them be able to communicate to their teachers. Our teacher evaluation system, say what you will about it, it does include those affective elements of how teachers relate to young people. So a lot of times, special education, we're brought in to problem solve, and usually there's, something critical going on. And I always say, there's some things that are a supervision issue and some things are a special education issue. We need to make sure our leaders have support and know how to build that affective connection, how to help their teachers build that affective connection with young people. And I think that's part of, this entire district model of excellence in order to lift this work. Those are absolutely things that have to happen. And you can't, you can't deny that that's not an important part of engaging. If we're gonna talk about engagement, what we just see here is, you can call it chronic absenteeism, but it's chronic disengagement. So how do we engage our young people? How do we engage our families? We tend to put a lot on them, but there's a lot we need to do technically. Like you say, our DART team is looking at our systemic and our structural barriers, transportation, just, you know, we uncovered a myriad of issues just in our transportation system and how that was impacting students being able to get to school on the first day. So we really have to look under every rock and also work on what's happening in the classroom.
Just for a point of clarification, what's the difference between chronic absenteeism and truancy, or is that the same? Are we using the words interchangeably?
Right, no, so Abby's here. So there are some important designations in each of those. So students who are truant, habitually truant, and then chronically absent, those are two different designations.
You should really just state it.
I'll take this chair over there. Okay, chronic absenteeism, we covered that. So it's 10% of days missed out of their days of enrollment. So they could be enrolled for 20 days, they could be enrolled for 182, 10% of those days. So like could equate to 2 in a month, 18 in a year. Those are for any reason. Unexcused, excused, out of school suspension, whatever, that's chronic absenteeism. Truancy are affecting the ages of 7 through 18. So those age ranges. And you are truant if you miss 4 days in a month for an unexcused absence or 10 days total in a year. So either one of those unexcused absences only.
Not suspension.
Between those age ranges. And then we talked about habitually truant. Habitually truant students are those identified as unexcused absences 20 or more in a school year.
Excluding suspensions, excluding
unexcused
medical appointments.
Yes.
Excluding.
That's an accurate number?
That's the number
For truants.
for our current students right now.
Right, truant.
Let me clarify, they were either truant or chronically absent last year.
I have a question about that, Chairman. But so the other slide, and I know you're saying current students, Abby, it says there were 4791 who missed the 10% or more, and then this one is trying to clarify the truant and the chronic absent last year. So help me reconcile those two numbers.
So there are different thresholds for being truant. So you could be truant if you just missed the first 4 days of school in August, you are on that list for the rest of the year.
Right.
So if I miss just 4 days unexcused in the month of August, even if I come for every other day of the school year, I will be truant for the entire year. Now, if they were all unexcused, I could recover that number and become not chronically absent anymore as I enter my month of the year, probably by November, because we made up for those 4 days that we lost. I would no longer have an attendance issue.
So is it fair for me to say at any time of the year they were identified as either truant or chronically absent, is your point? Okay.
The 6,600.
Right, okay. The other question I have is in regards to vacation. You guys hit on this a little bit, but I'm trying to understand maybe Madam Superintendent. So are you suggesting that we should start after Labor Day with this graph? Because it's saying we're losing 300 students or so, right? And I know Dr. Sledge was talking about how you have to unpack that, some of this transportation, some of it's uniforms, some of it's old stuff. But, one of the things you said was we have to look at when we should start the school year. And I know that in speaking to staff immediately, the first week, a child is absent 2 days, they're on the list, and the staff has to start working it mandated by state, right? So just in terms of taking that seriously, I mean, is that something that you are looking at in terms of how we could be more effective?
It's a wondering that we had, right? When we look at it through the lens of, our families using that as a marker, the September, the Labor Day as a marker, and that's real. It is so real for our families in terms of enrollment, in terms of going to purchase uniforms. These are data points that we have from the Welcome Center. And so it's a wondering that we have as to, I'm not saying it's the only one, Ms. Oliver. We know that there's a variety, right? We talked about transportation issues as well. Barriers that we ourselves, from a systemic perspective, are creating. And then, of course, there are the other barriers in terms of our families. Even us saying, it doesn't matter that you don't have your uniform shirt. Come to school anyway, right? And that was just not enough for some of our families. So a multitude of issues, but, clearly, you see here, clearly there's a difference.
And then just one other quick one. I just want to talk about inside suspension for a second. We talked about outside. So can we talk about if inside is impacting these numbers or not? So I'm looking at you, Abby.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I had a slide about ISS, but I don't.
I don't know when. I'm sorry that I don't have that information with me, but I know that there was a change in law about how inside suspensions count. I believe it was like previous to like halfway through the midpoint last year. In-school suspensions it could have been the previous school year. Things blend after a while. But in-school suspensions, anything over than a 90-minute in-school suspension would count as absent. And anything under 90 minutes, the student would be counted as present. But that is no longer in play anymore. So right now, an in-school suspension counts as present. And that student should be receiving instruction in school in that setting.
Thank you.
I have something. In regards, earlier we talked about our students who come to us in a place where we're hoping they would have a different skill set when they reach us in kindergarten. And then we have KM1, we have kindergarten, 28%, and then we have first grade at 23% on, and as it relates to chronic absenteeism. So it's a compounded problem because you're not arriving with that skill set, and at the same time, 28% in K is chronically absent.
So when we look at the other side of the continuum, we know that our approach, some of our efforts are the same, right? In terms of our outreach, in terms of our practices inside our schools, but when a kindergartner or first grader or second or third grader, right, doesn't come to school, we know that that's an adult issue. And I'm not saying that, high schoolers, it's not an adult issue, but there's a different element there, right? There has to be a different approach, because then we're talking about whoever the parent or the guardian is, and making sure that they have all of the resources that they need, right, to get the students in. And that is around what's the expectation, what's the value set, what's the barrier, so many different elements at that end of the continuum for our little ones.
And I have a question. Is some children, like clockwork, they're getting picked up early every day? I'm like, and then I did ask a question one time, and it was like a work issue. I got to be at work, so I'm like, well, do you have anybody else that could pick them up? And that still goes on. Like, school ends, say if school ends at 3:30, you're getting picked up at 2:15 every day. Like, at what point are the school leaders saying, your child is missing over an hour a day of school? Like, picking them up early, this is that has to be addressed. So, and I know that goes on currently. So I don't know. We have to do something about that. If you have to pick up your kid around 2:15 every day and school gets out at 3:30, they're missing there's no way they're gonna be able to perform to the best of, I guess to the best of their ability for the instruction that they're receiving, but that too has to be looked at. Or, because how would that, because you're getting marked present, because you were here most of the day, so you would be kind of like not, under the radar. We wouldn't really capture that. So I'm hoping our principals are paying attention, like, to that. And sometimes, some of our schools were pretty, and I know this might be going a little bit to the left, but some of our schools, you remember, like, you cannot, it was like a protocol. At a certain time, parents aren't coming to the classroom. Dismissal it was like a dismissal plan. But now it's like parents could just show up at the classroom and pick, like, it has to be, we have to get more uniform with how we have, like, I know some rules make sense for certain buildings, I get that. But that end of the day routine, to me, in some schools I've been told it's lax. Because say if I have, a parent should not, in my opinion, and I'm sorry, because sometimes how do you know for a fact that that's that parent? Should not be able to just walk to the classroom and pick a child up. It's not dismissal time yet. I'm saying it's not dismissal time. And I'm telling you it happens. Because you don't know what that dynamic is. You don't, it's just so much room for error to me when that happens. Busybodies around, adults walking around in schools when it's not quite dismissal time yet. And I got a phone call on that, and at a school, and they're not happy about that process.
School's not happy?
So
The person in the school is saying, like, a parent, I was like, usually is dismissal, because if you have to pick your child up early, if you have to pick your child up early, you have to come before a certain time, because at a certain time, we start our dismissal routine. And part of our dismissal routine is not, oh, it's about to be time to get out of school, and you just walk to a classroom, you get a kid, someone else is getting a kid, somebody can grab somebody's kid. Like, that is too lax for me. And we used to, some schools, I'm assuming they do it well, but not everywhere, and that scares me.
So I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing protocols around safety, and then I'm also hearing protocols around parental request to release a student. And so, again, we ask that if there's a school or program, we would like to know, so that we can, one, look into it, and then address it actually with the entire principal body around the fact that, students are still missing instruction. And so then that becomes, if I hear you correctly, and you're saying that this is an everyday issue for a family, we know that there's a need that family has for additional supports, right? And I wonder if this is a school that doesn't have an after-school program, right? Which I know, I wish we could have tomorrow in all of our schools, because I know how important that is for many of our families. But we would ask that you let us know from a programmatic perspective, so that we can immediately address it.
Right. I just want to add, so that's some of the data that we're really digging into is how many students are absent on early release days, for instance, because maybe the school doesn't have aftercare. So part of what the DART team is doing is really just kind of digging into every aspect that could be impacting attendance. So I appreciate you bringing these issues up. They're noted.
Can I ask to clarify one more thing? So chronic absenteeism does include sick days. It's just absent, but truancy, right. Truancy does not. Truancy is only unexcused, or is that, am I not understanding that?
Yes, truancy is unexcused absences. Chronic absenteeism is
just not being
any day. Any day the child is not in school, doesn't matter why, excused, unexcused. However, they can only have 9 unexcused absences in a school year, and then a doctor's note is required for every absence after that.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's unexcused.
But the label of chronically absent from it is automatic.
Unfortunately,
Just not
yes,
being present in school, it doesn't matter the
If you have a case with a
reason.
medically fragile student, unfortunately, if that student is not coming to school because of their medical conditions, they would be labeled absent, therefore chronically absent, unless they were receiving instruction from a tutor at home. In those cases, like I know that's not what you asked, but it's an example that I can provide. If they're getting instruction from a tutor at home, or they're doing virtual learning in the classroom, they could be marked present because they're receiving instruction.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, my association as to why I asked actually was around the kindergarten number. I was just wondering because I don't know if that's like the first time kids are in school and they get sick more because they're being exposed to germs. I mean, I have no idea, but I just, because that's a striking number and it's
But if
kind
they
of so
have a
different.
doctor's note after that 9th one, so parents can excuse for any reason after that 9th one if they have a doctor's note, and many of our schools might have clinics that could help with that. They could be excused as long as they have a reason.
So they wouldn't be truant, but they would still count
No,
towards
they
our
wouldn't
chronically
be.
absent
They would
data.
not be truant if they're excused. If they're excused absences, they are not truant.
Right, but they would still count towards chronically absent data is what I'm asking, yeah. Yeah. And this one is that's only chronically absent data. That's not both, right? The one with that bar graph. Okay, and thanks.
So I wasn't going to ask this question, but Tiffany just like brought up a thing. So if a parent writes a note for a student, that absence is excused or unexcused?
Up until the 9th.
It could be excused for any reason up until the 9th one, and then a doctor's note is required.
So even if the absences, so say my kid has 10 excused absences that I wrote notes for, still chronically absent because there's not a doctor's note?
You can write as many notes as you want for that 10th one, but if it's not a medical note from a medical professional, then it would be unexcused.
Interesting, okay. I wonder if parents know that. Because, I mean, I have a child who has an illness, and I'm learning this tonight. So I had a question about data on the next slide. So this city map that we see here, chronic absenteeism rates by zip code. Now, is this for the previous school year? So this would be
Yes,
for-
I'm sorry about my labels. I neglected to put that and the zip code on it.
Okay, so this is for 2017, 2018, and this is anyone who missed 9 or more days for the school year or 4 consecutive days or
No,
days
this
where
is
the-
not truancy. This is just chronic absenteeism. So it's any student that missed 10% of their days of the school year.
Why did I think that truancy only applied to 7th grade and up?
7 years old.
7 years old, I'm sorry. Okay, good. All right, so this is anyone who missed
10% or more.
10% or more of the school year
Of days,
for
yep.
any reason. So that's 2 days, a month, or more
Yep,
last
got
year.
it.
Okay, so that's why the numbers look so out. I mean, some of this is like arbitrary too, like these benchmarks that we like, and like when we're counting stuff and 2 days per month, and if it's 4 in a row, and if it's like, I mean,
This is for the entire year.
but this is for the,
Need cheat sheet.
but if students missed the whole week before school started, would they be counted as? Okay, so then they would be counted chronically absent for the entire year
Yep.
at some juncture. So this is anybody who at any point, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to clarify because I think that sometimes we feel like, oh my gosh, this is so outrageous, but there are like arbitrary guidelines that we set like around definitions for things and like if they've been in
They're
the state, right,
very
not we, but okay, good.
set
Yeah.
deadlines. We don't really have control over if we want flexibility around them or not.
Okay.
But I do agree with you that it seems, especially at the beginning of our school year, we really need tight data protocols to ensure that attendance is submitted daily, that we know why our students are absent. Are they absent because transportation didn't come, or are they absent on their own accord? Digging into that is, as Dr. Sellers indicated, is like what we've been doing in DART is digging into like what are the reasons why this is happening, and is this truly reflecting, I'm not coming to school for a ninth grader, I'm not choosing to come to school, I'm disengaged, or it's a family barrier to getting there, or is an operational issue.
Yeah, or if you were like sick more than twice.
Or
I'm thinking about my PTO days. Like I would be chronically, if people would count my I would have chronic absence. I mean, like when you hear like, oh my goodness, like 36% of students in this zip code are chronically absent, and then you realize that that's like 2 days a month. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to downplay like the importance of this, but I think it's great for us to be able to like actually frame it and to actually understand like, okay, this is helpful. Thank you.
I mean, can I follow up? Because I think it's also, I mean, I'd be really interested to dig deeper on the correlation between these various data points and student performance or student growth, in terms of like, you know, okay, fine, if somebody is going to count in this number if 1 month they were sick, really sick and got the flu, but did that have, because for that month they were chronically absent, but did that, you know, did that have an impact on?
There's a strong correlation with chronic absenteeism in academics.
Is that for like the whole year, or if you know what I'm saying, like for students who are chronically absent for a whole year, or if they just flashed up as like a 1 month? I mean, because everybody's counting in this aggregate number, I guess, unless I'm not understanding something. Anybody who was absent at any point, chronically absent at any point, even if like, because in September they got really sick, but then they were present the entire rest of the year. Do we actually look in those various, what do you call cohorts, or?
There are, so Dr. Torres Rodriguez referenced the RISE dashboard, so that is actually one of the things that we are able to look at in the RISE dashboard. So while there's a continuum of achievement, so think grades, for example, we may have students that have A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's. There's also a continuum for attendance rates. So you could have kids that, you know, come 95% of the time, 90 to 94, and so on. And so we put kids into blocks. So we're able to look at, is there a relationship between them having F's and not being in school? And you would think that somebody who's in school every day, you would be very alarmed if they had F's. So we would want to look into what's going on with those kiddos. But also for the same reason, the converse, not coming to school, F's, that makes sense. But what if you have A's and you're not coming to school? Like, so we're looking at all different angles of that, just like we do for achievement. Thanks.
I just also wanted to mention, so our data protocol, so we have a new data protocol just to make this consistent across schools. It's not to say that schools weren't using data teams and implementing data teams, but it's having a consistent method of looking at data, looking at student performance, and looking at data, like you say, absences, finding out, you know, using live data, not waiting for lagging indicators, but on a routine basis, on a weekly basis, our data team's looking at the student performance, and are they seeing how many was the student, did they receive a referral for behavior? Were they out due to being sick? You know, if they were out and they didn't have an excused absence, why were they out? So that's part of now our live data protocol that makes sure that we are looking at all of that as, you know, on an ongoing basis.
I also just want to add for anyone that's, you know, going to watch or is watching us, so excused absence or not, right? Students are still not accessing
They're missing
the
out on
instruction. The instruction.
Right.
And so for some of our students, right, that's if they're ill for 4 or 5 days, they're you know, some of them are just going to come and bounce right back, but many are not, right, in terms of the amount and the instruction missed. And so that's the other piece that we have to kind of work on with our families. I know I can't say you're not, we've told our parents, we suggested to our parents, please do not make it appointments throughout the day, right? But there's but so much that we can suggest to a parent.
So, if I may though, and I'm gonna try not to be crude, but I'll probably fail. I understand that, but what if, when I look at that slide, what it says to me socially is that our kids think school sucks, and so they don't go. And if school's not fun, and if it's a place that is a fortress and it is not inviting to me or culturally supporting me or just emotionally supporting my transition from child, teenager, or adolescent, or whatever the case may be. How do you chart that? Because if I'm not going to school because I don't feel engaged and I don't feel like I'm learning anything and I'm disengaged from that, how do you quantify that? If you have a student that's intelligent and capable but doesn't feel that they're engaged, how do you quantify that? Because those are some of the subsets that people will reject education and reject school. And those are the cultural things that I'm discussing with you. If, again, my philosophy in life is, hey, you know what, I'm gonna make money and not care about anything else, then this is not a value to me. And if it's not a value to my household, how do you introduce that love of learning or that, the component of this is good for your child, it's good for your young person, and so we want you to come to school every day, even though psychologically it's a stressor for me to be in that building, to go in that building, to interact, or because of the breakdown between the teacher and the parent, or breakdown between the teacher and the principal, now I don't want to be there. So how do you, because that contributes to school culture and school climate. And if I am being disrespected and I feel rejected in my school climate, in my school culture and climate, then I'm not going to be there. So how do we address that?
So, well, as we move through, we'll talk about some of the ways that we are addressing it, because there are proven and promising ways that progressive districts have engaged in order to make a difference and help re-engage students. We know that dropping out, that outcome, that's not an event. That's a gradual process of disengagement that happens over time.
It generally starts in the 5th grade.
So all of the things you mentioned are extremely important, and we can definitely talk about some of the ways that we are addressing that using, like I said, proven and promising practices. These aren't things we're making up. These are things that we want to replicate based on what's worked in similar communities where we have students that are disengaged for a variety of reasons. So we can definitely talk about that as we go forward.
Before we go forward, I'm sorry, guys. I know you guys we need to move on. Just going back to our goal, when we have the 4791, that is actually students who've missed at least 18 days of school, right? 18 or more days of school. I know I'm finding the 6637 to be a little bit confusing because we're talking about at any time during the year, but at the end of the day, is the kids, it accumulates to the 18 or more. So it's not just the kids who had the 2 days for 1 month or even was out sick for a week or something like that. The other thing, I feel like our conversation is definitely going into a truancy conversation, which I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to dig deeper in terms of the truancy side of the house, because some of the stuff that we're pulling out, and I'm sure Dr. Schellers is going to get to some of this, it comes out of that, right? So they're going to check to see if it's a medical issue, if there's some other transportation issues and all of that, to actually figure out the kids who are habitually truant. And based on the change in state statute, now truancy comes under the responsibility of the city. So I would love to have more of that deep dive conversation with that. The other two things really quick, if somebody could put on our parking lot. We talked about out-of-school suspension. I think it's really important to talk about how we're going to make sure that that's consistent across our schools, the decision for a young person to be suspended. So if we can maybe put a pin in that. And then the last thing I'll say is, unfortunately, the trends that start in pre-K and earlier definitely flow, unfortunately, into K through 12. So it would be great for us to collectively have a campaign around that. So what happens is, many times when we worked really hard to make sure that families and other partners and community understand that pre-K is not daycare. Some parents still treat it as if it's daycare. So if they have a day off from work, they don't bring their child to pre-K, which means they're losing out in learning. And based on some data that I have access to, it's unfortunate the numbers are extremely high. And when that flows right into kindergarten and those bad habits start persisting until the school is trying to catch up with those parents. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
And if we could work on that too, again, maybe not tonight, but just put those on our parking lot, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
I am curious to look at comparatively our students in pre-K and then students that come from other centers to see what those habits look like.
I would think that would be interesting. I can tell you, I have some data that may be helpful for you, but I do not have HPS data, which is very interesting. So we could talk about that offline. But it's definitely, unfortunately, a trend that we see when it comes to just chronic absenteeism. Not, you know, again, this is different with truancy, but needless to say, I think it's worth it to have that conversation. Thanks.
And then to your other point around OSS, just a preview for the collective board, we are going to have a conversation around policy. We know that we have a very clearly defined student code of conduct policy. There's a clearly defined code of conduct, but the policy right now speaks to principals, right? Having say in suspension. And so while I'm not saying that that should not rest with our principals, it warrants an opportunity for us to step back and see, given that now we're implementing all of these other interventions and support structures, should there be another structure in between there? So heads up for more conversation around that. Go back?
No.
No.
Continue. It's 8:18.
Palante, okay. So Dr. Scheller started to kind of allude to some of the things that we're doing, and the next few slides speak to system level structures, processes, and procedures, and then school level processes and procedures around our efforts to address chronic absenteeism. So we do have the structure, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Sellers around the DART team.
Right. So our DART team is our district attendance remediation team, and that consists of leadership. It consists of myself, director level leadership. We have health services, we have communication, data and accountability. So we're trying to engage, and also our outreach partner, Nushet Blackburk, is also a member, really looking, like I said, just kind of, looking under every single rock we can possibly look under in terms of assessing, identifying, and then eliminating barriers, systemic and environmental barriers to attendance. So our DART theory of action that was that truancy and chronic absenteeism will decrease when we assess, identify, and remove those barriers. So we had 4 overarching strategies, which you can see here. We wanted to make sure we really understood our school-based attendance system. I think some of the increase in our numbers for chronic absenteeism could be attributed to people now reporting, because as we said, the default was that a student was present. So as we dug into ensuring that our data was really accurate, we wanted to make sure that teachers were taking attendance every day, so we really did have an accurate number. So part of it, like I said, is looking at those system structures and practices, and then supporting attendance teams and making sure that they were engaging in the practices they needed to around attendance. So like I said, supporting schools with data accuracy, and then looking at proactive measures to prevent students from becoming chronically absent. So we know when we can start to see that trend, when students are starting to become, if they're 1 to 5 absences away, we want to really be proactive in reaching out to the family, finding out what's happening, because we can make sure that we prevent students from going into that range, but also we can help students recover by digging into that data and reaching out to students. So strategy 3 is important because we're continually refining the focus of the DART team. The makeup has gotten a bit broader as we've gone on. Like I said, we have now executive leadership. I'm on as a cabinet member, health services, transportation. We have social work involved. So it's amazing when all these people sit around the table, just really what we're uncovering in terms of some of our, like I said, systemic and environmental barriers that really, are demonstrated in this data. So strategy 4 is leveraging every single channel of communication that we possibly can. So engaging our community partners, the Nouchette's team, the outreach team has just done an incredible job with our kickoff, our back to school campaign, getting students back to school, but really framing good attendance in a positive light on that first day. Neighborhood canvassing, we're getting out there in the neighborhoods, we're going into the bodegas, making sure that they understand what the hours of school are kids coming in, are they buying Mountain Dew and Now and Laters? When are they doing this? Are they supposed to be in school? And also reaching out to our faith-based leaders, because we know a lot of the work that we're doing is where the students aren't, right? So they're not in school, where are they? They're out in the community. Maybe they're going with an adult to the doctor, or they themselves have a doctor appointment. You know, part of our outreach as we move forward would be making sure that our medical providers understand the hours of school, that maybe they're being proactive and prompting, hey, you need a note for school, but just creating that awareness and that sense of urgency in the entire community so that we can get kind of everybody rowing in the same direction when it comes to being really aggressive and getting students to attend and helping families understand the importance of coming to school. So we want to go to the next. Any questions about the DART?
Any?
Is there like a hard, fast rule or line at which DCF becomes involved in these kinds of truancy cases or whatever? Is it
So there
like,
is.
is that educational neglect or what it's called, something to that effect?
There is a point where we can make a referral to DCF, so we have an attendance manual that clearly details the processes that schools should be engaging in to reach out to students. It's very well articulated, you know, day 1 absence, day 2 absence, day 3 absent, with clear, actionable ways that attendance team members should be reaching out to students, and when they do make that DCF referral. So that's all clearly articulated in the manual that attendance teams use. So yes, we can make a referral for educational neglect. We really want to build our relationships and strengthen our relationships with our families. We want to proceed cautiously in that regard, to the extent that we're really engaging in due process and due diligence and making sure that we've done everything that we could do before, subjecting, a family to that, to that level of engagement with an agency like DCF.
That was why I asked. I mean, it
Right.
really isn't a hard, fast rule. It's like a.
Well,
because I'm just with the tension with the OCA, and I'm just.
Yeah, no, it's not.
How does that kind of?
Well, it's not something that we want to delay. So like I said, I don't have the timeline available, but there's a very specific, like I said, day 1 absent, and there's a series, there's like an FAQ. So there's a question, was the student, were they absent on day 1, but did they, so there's some kind of if-then statements that are involved. So at a very specific point, though, we do absolutely, engage DCF in getting involved.
This is a lot of detailed information, and so again, I'm just wondering, when do you share this with parents? Because we're in 2 weeks in. When do you share this with parents?
That's an excellent question.
In terms of what it means, what.
All of it, because knowledge is power. So I need to know what the rules are and the guidelines are so that I can make sure that my students and I are on track. But if you don't tell me, and I'm finding out incidentally or accidentally, or I'm finding out on the 10th absent or something to that effect, then now I'm in the system, I'm in the grind, and there's nothing I can do to stop or save myself or prevent whatever from happening, because I don't have the information. It's that whole knowledge is power, or so when is there a standard, or do we do it during open house? Like when is this conversation only shared with kids that are at risk?
I've always gotten it. Over the years, I'll always have gotten the thing that tell you what it is with red and some other colors. I've always gotten it. Maybe because I hate school absence. Oh my God. I want my daughter to be like, I'm like, Dad, you really try to send me to school? Like, you really can't go?
No.
So, but I've always, maybe the schools that they've gone to, but I've always gotten that sheet that tells you what it goes into. Of course, it's not a deep level, but it's like a sheet they use standardly that tells you what it is, what it is to be chronically absent, and I don't know, but I always got like this one sheet paper.
Right, so there is a student handbook. My understanding, there's a student handbook that does go home with students that details a lot of this information. We also have, parents they get messages through school messenger. There will be a letter that will go out, and if there's a certain number of days absent, a letter will go home. So in terms of presenting this comprehensively to a group of parents, like on a school campus, I can't speak to the extent to which that happens, but a handbook does go home. But making sure that parents are able to comprehend, they have the time to dig in to all that, that detail. That's something that's a good point.
We do have packages that are going to go out in terms of
Right.
when we announce September as September Awareness.
Your welcome back message, right?
Say again?
Right. Yeah, your welcome back message went out to families.
As schools share some document with parents at the beginning of the year, speaking about what the expectations are, and the parents are expected to sign this and send them back, this might be a good place to talk about what the attendance policy is.
In addition to when schools get together, but I know that some schools are using it in their newsletter. We did send principals out a link with a variety of resources on attendance, and so I've gotten some of the newsletters, and they have some of these resources there. It requires a multi-pronged approach, right? Some of our parents are not going to be able to, some of them can't open the attachment because of the link, or you're saying computers. Yeah. I know that this one specific school has, multilingual documentation for the parents in their newsletter. But beyond that, right, what else should we be doing in terms of really interacting with our parents around the importance of attendance and what it means to achievement and all of that? And so, the thinking now, and I know that this is a little premature, and I'm kind of sharing details that I should have, because we're going to do some more visioning with my team around the event that we're having for parents in the fall, which is around not only absenteeism and attendance, because we want to hit so many of our areas of improvement. So we're going to target absenteeism. We're going to target the literacy piece. We're going to try to target the fact that, college awareness. And so, and I already hear, some people in the team saying, okay, I know you want to really target so much because we want to have our parents really exposed to it all, but we also have to be careful, right? Because there's a lot that's going to come at our parents. And so how do we kind of space it out? I'm kind of, going into many different directions, but it's connected to everything that we're talking about, yeah.
Right. So, we can sort of transition into talking about our individual school truancy action plans. Because as the chairman was saying, how are we making sure that knowledge is power? How are we making sure that parents understand the rules of the game? So I can say we have things like the superintendent's welcome message. We have student handbooks that go home. We have, every school on the second day received a list of all their students who had not showed up to school. So I can tell you that schools are taking an individual approach to make sure that parents understand, what the rules of the game are. So we're going from broad, you know, making sure that folks have the information, to individual, almost down to like a case management approach to each individual student who isn't showing up to school. So in terms of making sure those parents, you know, understand the rules of the game, as you said, that's part of what we're working on. And our chief, Ms. Avila, and our executive directors have all been, you know, they've been engaged in a full court press with schools and principals on making sure that they're reaching out to students who haven't shown up, and finding out what we need to do to help them get in school. So the individual truancy plans include those tier 1 actions. So these are things that we're going to be doing universally. We're talking about academics. We're talking about things we're doing universally and consistently in a standardized fashion across the district. We're taking that same approach to reducing chronic absenteeism. So we have our tier 1, which is risk reduction and prevention. We're making sure that everybody has an awareness of how important this is. You know, for instance, all schools will include reducing chronic absenteeism as a SIP goal. Principals will include increasing attendance as a target within their student-focused outcomes. Teachers will include increasing average daily attendance as one of their student-focused outcomes. And parent engagement will also be. So these are just but a few, and we'd be happy to share the truancy action plan that in every tier, right, has pre-populated non-negotiables that have been agreed upon by the chief of schools and the executive leadership team. So these are things that absolutely will be an expectation in all our schools, like I said, related to risk reduction, prevention and intervention, and then individual intensive intervention. So these will be ongoing efforts, you know, to get our kids back in school and get them re-engaged. We've also, you know, provided the superintendent, we brainstormed around ways to get students engaged in school. You know, like I said, I just for the record want to make sure that when I say the F word, I'm talking about the word fun, okay? What is our wish list in terms of what we would need to infuse into our system to make school fun? Are we offering the right courses? In times of scarce resources, sometimes athletics and fine arts go by the wayside, but a lot of times those are the very things that give that kid just the determination to want to go to school that day, to make them feel that they have to get to school. So we have to recognize those things, and we have to reach out. We have to depend on you all, our business partners, to really, you know, help us figure out how we're going to find the resources to infuse that into Hartford Public Schools and make Hartford Public Schools a choice every day, that students want to come to school, that parents want to send their children here. So I can tell you that that's something I know that this team is committed to under the, you know, courageous leadership of our superintendent. You know, we're not going to aim too low, I can tell you that. Any questions about the truancy action plan? So all schools will submit a truancy intervention plan that will include customized actions in addition to the non-negotiables.
Now, we know that the problem with absences is that you're missing instruction. So if a parent knows that their child is going to be absent for a while, is it reasonable? And I know that some parents actually don't have a choice as to when they vacation because of pressures at work. Is it reasonable to say to the school, give me some materials that my child can work at while he's not in attendance?
Well, I don't know if somebody else with more experience wants to speak to that, but it's not unheard of. So when a parent plans an absence and a vacation, that, you know, work can be assembled, you know, for that student to take home and work on. And also you can establish a requisite amount of time that student will be expected to make up that work once they come back. These are things that can be agreed upon. Yvette, if you want to speak to that.
So though we can give students work, there's no replication of being in a classroom and being instructed by a teacher. And so the work that will be given to the student will be work that they would have to be able to cover without the instruction from a teacher. And though parents can help with that, and it won't qualify as being in class, even though they would do the work. So it will be still considered an absent. Is it better to have something? Absolutely, that they have some type of work to try to keep them current as much as possible if the child's not going to be in school.
Oh, I have a question. Just, it's kind of off topic, but on topic. Syllabus in sort of the course online, is that a standard for teachers, or is that a regulation, or is that just something that's optional? Meaning, if the student, if mom was going to plan a vacation or something to that effect, couldn't she simply just go on the website? Or there was a time when you could go on the website and see the teachers pretty much the syllabus, and then you can sort of just take your assignments. But that's not consistent in every school. So is that something that, are we working on that? Are we looking at that? Or is that just something that is just a non-starter?
I have a high school who
I need
is
to get my
lined
kids
out.
in their school.
No, but no, I was gonna say, still, if she, no, and still, she's a high performing student. She still, if she wasn't there for a lesson, she can't, it is something that, especially depending on what level you're on, you can't just say, oh, I'm gonna go do that. Right. You weren't there for that instruction. You can try to turn to that page and think you're gonna do it, but I've seen that's a struggle too. If she's out sick and you try to go, you see the assignment is up there, but it's something that was taught to help you understand that lesson. It's different if it was just a reading assignment. You know, you can read that chapter and it's some questions you have to add, but when you get into like math and science, it might get difficult.
Well, no, I mean, I get that part, but for example, if you're studying geometry and you are in a particular chapter and you have these theorems that you're studying and you missed a particular day, you might be able to catch up. It all depends. I mean, right, you're right. It all depends on the student. I totally get that, but just in general, because I'm just looking at the duality of things. As a parent, I have to track that student, and so because they're adolescent, I can't always trust that they're going to give me the whole truth and the whole answer. So I need to be able to have my own way of making sure that that stuff is done. Because again, just speaking about teenagers, oh, you know, you developed a 24-hour illness because you didn't do the homework. And so that's the other thing that you need to guard against. So I'm just, you know, again. I got to tell you about my struggles. Oof.
Well, I have found another issue, and I don't know if they do this at all schools, but certainly in my boys' school, they post homework on their website, but it's not consistent. So I can go in at times and see that Mr. Jones' homework is there, but Ms. Smith never posted her homework, but there was homework there. So when my child says, I have no homework, I'm not sure whether or not to believe him.
Thank you. I never believe him. Just never believe him. But that's adolescence.
So Major Goal 6, last one in this priority, increasing students' perception of feeling safe and valued. This is an area that we're still trying to develop in connection to our work with OCA.
It's the hardest one.
So I will, this is one of the questions in our survey. And it looks at having caring adults and what our students perceive. And it's breaking down, as you can see, by specific grades. And so, yeah, go ahead.
So 8 through 12,
Yeah.
69% believe that they are having a caring adult, or they don't.
That they have a caring adult. And just looking at the trend, right? Wondering I don't know if Abby, if we looked at a correlation between as students progress through the years, the percentage decreases in terms of their feeling that they have a connected adult. I know that's not what this is speaking to, but it's just a wondering that I have.
So we haven't done that. I can say that we haven't done that. We could cohort it and look at, age ranges over time, but this is an anonymous survey, so we're not actually able to target any particular children or match their responses over time to see if they improve.
So I have a few questions about the methodology in terms of like the data collection. Can you tell me how the survey was administered and what the percentage is of individuals who actually took the survey, and if it was administered across all of our schools, and if there were specific schools, like is this neighborhood schools, community schools, like I just need to know, like, can we talk about like the sample set for the data?
So
and methodology.
To the degree that I can. So the information that I have. So I don't oversee the administration of the survey. That was previously handled by Mario Flores, our former director of climate and culture. So the degree of knowledge that I do have that I can share. So this is a survey that's administered to three sets of stakeholders in our district. It's students, it's staff, and it's families. It is administered to students in grades 3 through 12, so we don't assess the climate of the students in K through 2. It's 3 through 12, and there are 3 forms of the survey. And they vary in terms of like developmental maturity of the items. So the first age range is grades 3 and 4, 5, 7, and 8, 12 as far as the survey items. It's administered in the spring, and it is expected that all students and all staff participate in the survey district-wide. As far as response rates, I don't know the actual percentage, although I can certainly follow up with you. I don't know if it's on the public, there's a public link on our Hartford Schools webpage that the response rates may be listed in there. They could be. But if not, I can certainly follow up regarding the response rates for the students and the staff. But there are a couple schools that did not administer the survey last year, and I can also follow up with you about the specifics of which ones of those schools. But I can attest that the majority of the schools, probably 44 out of 46 schools, did participate in the survey and did attempt to assess the majority of the students with the survey.
And how is the survey administered? Is this a paper survey? Is this an online survey?
It's an online survey for the students and the staff, administered through a program called Panorama. For families, it's administered in paper, and it's also available in translated versions of the form.
So this is like the school culture climate survey thing that we published?
Yes, and I should also say as well, things are coming. There are 2 versions of the survey to cut down on question fatigue for children. So the students will answer a set of items about their personal demographics. Are you a boy? Are you a girl? What do you identify as? How often are you absent from school? Blah, blah, things about them. And then there are items that are delivered to them. Students will get alternating items based on the survey that's delivered. So we don't assess the entire population on all items of the survey. It's an alternating form so that we can ask a bunch of questions, like 70 questions, of a representative population of children in Hartford. Does that make sense?
And so the data that we're looking at here is only the student-reported data?
Student-reported data. There are staff and family-reported data about these 2 particular domains, caring adults and student safety, and those are available on our public website at harvardschools.org. There's a climate link.
Okay, but that's not what we're seeing here. What we're seeing here is
students.
The student-reported data that's administered to them via an online system.
Correct.
Helpful. Thank you.
And this is from the same survey?
Yes. This is 2018 and 2017 results.
seems the results seem contrary to what I would have expected.
The kids are absent though.
No, the ones that have caring adults are the ones that feel less safe. It
Right.
doesn't make sense.
No, because what I see is when I look at it, I agree with you. When you look at caring adults and you 8 through 12, that could suggest rigor and accountability. So, you know what, you're trying to hold me accountable. I don't feel like you care about me because I'm just this, emotional teenager. Whereas grades 3 through 4 on school safety, just by having 3 boys, they get it in terms of the fighting and the disagreements and the rambunctiousness of that age group. And as you can see, as they get older, less altercation. Not to say that they don't have any, but I would have thought that this would have been different too. This only because, again, wow, yeah, I'm surprised. I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised, but surprised.
Abby, can you tell us which schools did not take the survey?
So off the top of my head, I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to misrepresent anybody because I know that there were some attempts to do some makeups with them, and I just don't want to misrepresent anybody's outcomes. But we certainly can follow up with you about that.
Please.
Yeah, we want to know that, and we'd also like to know what percentage of students took the survey.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good.
Writing the request. Who's writing Karen's request down? No. Just a quick overview of next steps with regard to making sure that our students are feeling safe and valued. And so, again, just like we talked about our efforts around chronic absenteeism, we want to make sure that we have a tiered system of supports around positive behavior as well. And to kind of give a quick highlight, Dr. Sellers, as to what each of these are. I know that PBIS has been around for a while here. I know that we've talked about restorative practices, and we're just getting into, a year into, the trauma-informed work. So if you can kind of unpack those.
Sure. So, as the chairman and many of you alluded to, we know that chronic absenteeism, addressing that, it's more than just addressing the seat time of the student. We've got relevance, personal goals, values. These are all things that we need to tap into when it comes to our young people. So, like I said, these are some of the proven and promising ways that progressive districts have used to engage students, to, as we say, build the capacity in our adults in order to provide them with ways to connect with young people. So positive behavior support, as the superintendent said, has been around for a while. The critical features are that it's, creating that positive classroom environment, teaching teachers approaches that are not punitive, that are not overly authoritative, but focus on building a classroom community where students feel safe, valued, and respected. And are able to learn how to interact, pro-social interaction with other people as modeled by the adult that's in the classroom. So it focuses on system structures and supports. It focuses on classroom rules and expectations, which are different. There are school-wide rules, there are classroom rules. Different teachers have different approaches. Students need to be taught how to meet expectations. They need to be taught what it means to behave. So it's deconstructing words like that. I need you to behave. What does that really mean? What does that really look like in this classroom? How might it differ from another teacher's classroom? So PBIS sets out to really, make behavior support consistent from classroom to classroom, because we know a lot of the issues that come up with students are just because of inconsistent expectations from classroom to classroom. You may have a teacher who's has more of a laissez-faire approach to discipline. Things are kind of cool and breezy. Then you might have an adult who, has more of a type A structure to the classroom. But it's about making sure that our rules and our expectations are fair, that they're non-punitive, and it's about creating that caring community in every classroom. We know that adults are at different levels of proficiency when it comes to their ability to relate to young people. So PBIS really seeks to look at the structures that help teachers build that capacity. So that affective piece is a big part of it. And one of the things that's done is that schools engage in a self-assessment in terms of how they are implementing the structures and the practices, and how those dispositions of a positive behavior intervention support are present on their campus. Restorative practices, the critical features of that are that culture change through relationships and community accountability versus punishing and excluding. And we're looking at our code of conduct. We are looking at our district practices to make sure that they're fair and equitable, and that they're, as we move forward, they contain more of this restorative approach where we're healing and repairing rather than punishing and excluding. Because we look at chronic absenteeism, and that 10%, I mean, when you're missing instruction, whether it's ISS, whether it's OSS, or if you're just out of school being absent, all of that, you're missing time in instruction. And ISS, that is in school, but that's not a substitute for a quality instructional program, for sure. So our trauma-informed schools, the critical features of this approach are that we recognize and respond to the effect of trauma and adversity on the brain and learning. So we've presented to our principals so that they have an understanding of trauma and its effects on the brain and learning, on its effects on students being able to attach to an adult in their life. Many of them have attachment issues with their primary caregivers. When they come to school, that's often a difficulty that we see between that teacher. So this is trauma-informed approach really creates tools and practices where adults, it's focusing on the adult stance in relation to their being able to connect with a student. Was there a question?
No.
You guys are okay? All right.
Can I ask a question about,
Sure.
is PBIS the one with those colors? Oh my goodness, that's, I'm not saying the
I was over here complaining.
Talking about the red, the green, and the yellow?
Oh, that's traumatic. Oh, because all I think about is being on green, and I wish sometimes it can have the level in, like, maybe words, meaning you're ready to learn, you're doing something, but when you're changing that color, then some parents pick them up, only thing they want to know is they on green, because red is when you got to call home. It's just, those colors, it's more of a distraction. I like the levels of what the colors mean, but the colors themselves, when you're moving them from one color to the next, for smaller kids, and I don't know if that's PBIS, but we used it everywhere.
Somebody might have thought that was PBIS or called it.
Or maybe the school had PBIS, but maybe I don't know how this chart got intertwined with it.
Sure. That could have been an individual classroom practice, but I know, part of the focus of this being positive is that there's a real non-stigmatizing approach. That there's a non-stigmatizing approach to, creating positive behavior supports that, that don't call out students, that don't stigmatize them. So, that's not really, that might have been just a practice that.
It was in many schools, but I don't know how it came about or if it was even associated, but I didn't like the moving of colors.
All right.
Because it's like a threatening thing, like, one more word, one more disruption. You're going from green to yellow.
Right.
They're like, I don't want to be. Then there's a breakdown because they don't want to be on yellow, they don't want to be on orange. And I just didn't, I was like, this is not good. But it was
Sure. I want to just say that
It's
I don't
probably
think
not.
that would characterize PBIS.
Okay.
In terms of, the fidelity of the
I always
model.
thought it was,
Yeah.
though. That's funny.
Right. Interesting.
Okay, so, is there any questions? I know we had the principal, she had to go, so we will honor her and hear from her later. Is there any other questions or comments? Sure.
I know people are ready to go. But so I'm just wondering the same thing that I was kind of wondering around other interventions or like tiered systems of interventions, because so many of the students within our district disproportionately either have emotional behavioral disorders or are identified as having emotional behavioral disorders. I'm just kind of wondering, like, I want to make sure that the lens that we're approaching this with is one of, I don't know how to say it, I'm just going to say it, right? That we're looking at it not the climate and culture that we're in, but like the climate and culture that we aspire to. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So like I feel like sometimes like there's a degree of like chaos that persists in some of our school environments. These are like some of the compounded effects of poverty. So I want to make sure that like as we're addressing these things around emotional behavioral disorders and trauma and acknowledging some of the environments that our students are coming out of, that we are still we're still looking at it, the world as we would like it to be, and not necessarily like the world that we're in. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay. That's really all I wanted to say about that. I mean, I know that this is really difficult work, and this looks like a really well thought out system in terms of interventions and addressing issues. But I want to make sure that, like, as we're approaching this and other initiatives that we have within our district, that we're not just looking at it in terms of like what we've always done, but like what we could potentially do for students, because we're not just preparing them for our environments, we're preparing them for the larger world, right? And like what is considered to be standard and acceptable behavior in the larger world. Feels like a thing that I had to say. Yeah. Thank
So
you.
I just want to add one more just part of the thought. So we do know that students come to school dysregulated for a lot of different reasons, right? And they're in the classroom. So part of the restructure of the Office of Student Support Services is creating an integrated model of psychological, social, and behavioral services. So we do have an additional support, a new support structure that'll be supporting this work. We're going to be really carefully looking at data, referrals, absences, suspensions, and making sure that we're reaching out, finding the story behind that data at each and every one of those schools where we see trends that might indicate a potential for some inequitable discipline practices. Because we want to make sure that we're providing those environmental supports, looking at what we can do to reduce risk. Sometimes students come in, they're very dysregulated because of what happened at home, the whole bus situation, we've got to go into the cafeteria, all of that sort of ramps that up. So we're going to be looking at all those systems, arrival, dismissal, how do all these things contribute to a student's sense of instability? And that's part of the trauma-informed approach too, is we're just putting in that consistency and stability in our school environment. So, that's part of that vision of where we're going. But just want to make sure that you all were aware of that. I think that's going to be a really strong part of our support system as we move forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I just add to that I hope we're, I think some things happens in our schools, and I don't like sometimes that I know so many people that are in schools, because I don't even want to know half of the stuff that they're telling me. I'm like, but I have just a general concern around the true support that classroom teachers are getting around behavior. Not things like you're not, culturally there's a disconnect, not that. I'm talking about You throwing a chair across the room, I'm trying to call the office, in 20 minutes, nobody's showing up. So what are we gonna do here? Am I gonna continue teaching? Are we gonna act like you ain't just throw the chair? Like, I've been in some, Mr. Downs is over here, we were in a school a couple of years ago, and I got harmed and things thrown at me, but they were so little that I'm like, we could handle it, right? My thumb still hurts sometimes about, got a book thrown at me, but I'm telling you.
Little ones?
Yeah. So, and there wasn't no cultural, we was relating. So there is some support that is not there. So our school leaders have to, when you call the office, you know some teachers like, they calling for everything. I'm talking about real things happening in the classroom. And we're not gonna just say, okay, that happened and move on to the next lesson. So these things are happening, and I don't know if the school is overwhelmed. Is it happening so much that they can't react to that classroom? It may be that something else happened in other classrooms. We know you called, but we handling something over here. But how do we get that? And sometimes are they afraid to tell their supervisors because they want to like, well, I want to feel like I have control over my school, so I don't want to necessarily tell all the, you know, what's really going on. But it's some stuff happening in our classrooms that it shouldn't be. Like, I'm not talking about stuff, because I've gotten calls, it's like, oh, your daughter, you know, she's throwing things, but then you get there, oh, she threw a teddy bear. Come on, don't, you calling home, we rushing up there. Not things like that. I'm talking about things that students and adults can get harmed. And if we don't dig deep into seeing, like, are you just acting out because you want to look cool, or is there really something going on at home, or you don't dare do this at home and you just doing this at school, because that happens too. But I don't know that, like, the expectation of the school has to be, this is not okay, we don't do this here. Like Karen was saying, this is the environment we're saying we're gonna have. We're not saying it's so bad and we just have to deal with it because it's so bad. No, this is not okay on any level. But I've been put in some pretty serious situations, and it's tough in some of our schools. So I'm just hoping that school leaders are appropriately telling their support system what is really going on in their schools, because if you guys don't know, you're not gonna help. I could tell you some stories, but if the principal is not dealing with it and said, oh, I heard it was an incident at your school, and was it properly addressed? But no, for them to know that if a student throwing his chair, that's pretty serious, and we need to know how to help that student and get them to a place where, instead of saying, oh, that's just them, it's not okay. So I'm hoping that, because all of this would be for nothing if the data is not properly given and dealt with. So thank you.
We certainly want to create environments in which like nothing is thrown, right? Whether it is a teddy bear, a pencil, or just like none of that, because unless it's part of a lesson, because then that means that there's an interruption to the educational process, one. And two, that there's a feeling that students are not safe and teachers are not safe, right? And one of our goals is around making sure that students and staff, by the way, feel safe and valued. And so we want to be, not only do we want to create the tiered systems of supports, but it's around culture and making sure that people feel that they can express the concern to anyone, whether it is to the teacher, and if they're afraid to do it to the teacher or to the administrator, someone, right? And I know we're starting to amplify the work around the campaign, right? Last year was the Tell Someone campaign. Right. This year is the I Care campaign. But we really want to make sure that it is clearly communicated, so we'll continue and try to re-emphasize that around the fact that we don't want anyone to feel that, it's just It's just that student. No, that's not it. And I validate what you're saying, Karen, around let's not only focus on where we are today, but also where we want to be. But for us, right, it's again that dual, that there's a parallel there, because we certainly can't get to where we want to be without, one, understanding and acknowledging the antecedent, right? The behavior that led to where we are today, or the reason behind it. So.
And I also want to say that, like, I really appreciate the fact that you all are indulging us in these conversations, like, as central office staff, because you all are the people who are in front of us today, but this is like a long-standing systemic problem, right? And we're asking you all to do things that we don't actually have the resources to do well. So I appreciate the work that you all do. You know, we had a policy committee meeting where we were talking about restraint and seclusion and the use of physical force, and we were talking about school safety officers being used really as folks who should be behavior interventionists, right? And that's a resource issue. So I just want to acknowledge and recognize that we're asking you all to do something, and we haven't given you the proper resources to do it well, and we appreciate you engaging us in these questions, because we're asking you all to be accountable for, you know, the fact that the state didn't give us our money, amongst other things, right? Like that happened long before you came, but we appreciate that you all are committed to solving the issues that we have and like moving the needle in the right direction. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Anything else? Any other comments? I'll save mine for the next meeting. I'm going to adjourn the workshop. Workshop adjourned.